What's up, folks? Huge shout out to Kaden Gardner, the author of this series. He just released a webtoon video that's set in the same universe as this one. Make sure you go check it out and subscribe to his channel to show your support. It's hard to properly describe the feeling of dying. The moment between the light going out and what's left of you passing on is seamless. I can remember the thoughts racing through my brain, the visions, all the memories I had, plans for the future wasted, all the people I'd killed. I wasn't what you'd call a good person before I was killed. That's kind of what had gotten me into the situation I was in at that moment. I was a member of the CIA Special Activities Division, a paramilitary operator in charge of a team of other operators that were assigned to break into a complex in Grozny. The complex was owned by a company called Gideon Pharmaceuticals. For those of you who don't know, Gideon is the most powerful entity on the planet. They've got fingers in everything: miracle drugs, politicians, hotels, news networks, you name it, they probably own a stake in it. We'd been tipped off by a defector from their company that they had been working on a bioweapon, some new virus that could change the course of history. And it was being tested on civilians in Grozny. So naturally, the boss, Shaw, wanted it. Bing, bang, boom. We were there. The mission itself went without a hitch. We gathered intel for 6 months, then passed it to a local militia. Some of it legit, some of it not. It was enough to cause a full-scale riot at the complex. The militia somehow ended up with a briefcase with a vial of the weapon inside of it. We stole it from them relatively easy. Didn't take any casualties. Well, any fatal casualties. I ended up getting shot in the back of my shoulder while shoving Jamie's sorry ass away from gunfire. He'd smoked an acid-laced joint right before we'd infiltrate the militia outpost. Or so we'd been led to believe. We barely made it out into the safe house. This is where my story really starts. With me on my back, bullet holes riddled my body as my blood pooled around me. Jamie's gun still smoking as he crouched over me. I was really hoping it wouldn't come to this. You left me no choice. The CIA can't make the world a better place. But I can. Jamie? I stammered as I coughed up blood. What? He asked with a smug grin on his face. Stop talking. I still had one last act of defiance in me as I raised my pistol and fired it one more time. Jamie's ear exploded. If I had the strength, I'd have fired at him a few more times. But I didn't. He grabbed his bleeding ear whilst unloading his pistol into my body. That was when things started getting weird. They say that as you're dying, that you see your life pass before your eyes. They're not wrong, but they're not entirely right either. I only saw the bad stuff I did, the people I'd killed, bodies I'd buried, things I'd covered up to protect my team. It was like a gut punch from hell. I could see the day that Agent Chad Davis had been pursuing a terrorist to the streets of Amsterdam. Why we were there, I couldn't remember, but I do remember the gunfight. I remember Chad was cornered. He shot at what he thought was the terrorist, but instead, it was a little girl. Sometimes the worst part of being the best marksman in your class is not missing. It was an honest mistake. Chad was never the same again afterwards. He started using humor as a coping mechanism for stressful situations. That and expensive whiskey. I of course was seeing this because I covered our involvement in it up. I convinced Chad not to resign, which made Jamie furious. It's probably part of the reason he killed me and stole the briefcase. After those visions stopped, I saw her. Agent Opilia fucking Wild. She was it for me. She was my endgame. I'd already bought the ring and had been planning my resignation when it happened. We'd been together for going on 2 years at that point. I can remember feeling happy that she wasn't on that particular mission with me, probably because Shaw was starting to figure out what was going on. Relationships between agents were forbidden on his team. We didn't care. Most of the team knew anyway. Chad found out on accident. Jamie, I'm not sure when. But I saw a vision of her, hot tears streaming down her face as she stood next to my body. My death would destroy her, all because I let her get too close. But I couldn't help that I loved her. The next thing I knew, I was staring up at the sky, a man in a dark suit blocking out the sun. He looked down at me with a stern expression. Was all he said, before my vision faded. The next thing I knew, I was waking up. I was submerged in a thick, syrupy-like liquid that filled my lungs and burned my eyes. I was instantly in a panic as I began to try to thrash around. That was made difficult by the sheer consistency of the liquid. All of a sudden, I went from thrashing to falling. I landed hard on the cold tile floor, coughing and hacking up the liquid. My eyes burned less as they were out in the open air. I wanted to scream, but my lungs weren't empty yet. It took a good few minutes for me to get my bearings. I found myself in a white room, sitting naked in a puddle of red liquid. My eyes dotted around before finally landing on him. The man in the suit sat on a chair with a raised brow. "Hello, Mr. Grayson," he said in a rather neutral voice. I squinted at him as I got to my feet. I tried to speak in response, but I only barfed that red liquid. Apologies. It's been a long time since I've done an initiation myself. I forget how messy they are. You should get your voice back momentarily. Being dead for 2 days does things to the vocal cords, rigor mortis and all, but it's nothing the serum can't fix. I remembered the gunshots. My hand instinctively shot to my chest. The man smirked. "Yes, Mr. Grayson, you were shot and killed 20 miles outside of Grozny." I could feel my heart start pounding. Hell, I could hear it too. I guess my face had a look of bewilderment to it, because the man only exhaled. "I'm sure you have questions. Let's wait until the serum finishes its work before we talk," he said as he pulled a towel and some clothes from a nearby table and handed it to me. He smiled softly before turning and walking through a doorway. I wanted to follow. I really did, but my muscles hurt and my body just wanted to rest. I looked down at my chest where I'd been shot, only to find that it was all scar tissue. About 2 hours later, I was showered and clothed. I sat in what looked like a briefing room, my mind reminiscing the bullets tearing through my back and out my chest. I shuddered a bit as the projector screen ahead of me came to life. On it was a face I recognized all too well, the gruff scowl of director Cameron Shaw. The video played. "Hey Trent, sorry it had to be this way. You're probably wondering what the fuck is going on, so I'm gonna give you a quick explanation. You didn't make it back from our mission in Grozny. Officially, you are now KIA. If it makes you feel any better, Chad made it out. That being said, there is still work that needs to be done. Work that the CIA can't do on our end, politics being what they are, which is why the team can't know you're alive yet. I'm assigning you to a friend of mine, one who works outside the rules." Shaw took a breath. "He's the one who brought you back. He'll see it that you're well equipped and ready to operate. I'll do what I can on my end. I'm sorry, Trent. There's a lot to do, and we've got a world to save." The screen cut off. I wish I could say that I was beyond confused, but I wasn't. I knew this was about Gideon and whatever they'd been up to. You see, technically, we weren't supposed to be looking into Gideon. Not officially. Every time an official investigation was opened up, our higher-ups came in and shut it down, which is why we manipulated the militia. We had to make it look like it was them we were after. I guess Gideon noticed, thanks in big part to Jamie. I sat still for a second as the man in the suit entered. It was then that I realized that it felt like we were moving. I deduced we were on some kind of custom aircraft. "This your plane?" I asked. He nodded. "It is." "You got a name?" I asked. The man smirked. "I've got several titles. From now, you can just call me Horseman." "So, is now the time to start asking questions?" I asked. "I had several." Horseman nodded. "Come with me," he said. I followed him out of the room and into a hallway. He was a step ahead of me the whole time. "I brought you back using an ancient potion. I say ancient. It's been modernized. We used to call it the Omega Potion. I guess Omega Serum sounds better." "A magic potion?" I asked. "More or less. This way." He led me into a room. This room had an entire armory. There were guns upon guns on the walls, but they weren't the thing that caught my eye. The metallic ninja suit in the center of the room was. This suit was sleek and futuristic. Its eyes had a blue glow to them. It consisted of black armor plates over an even blacker bodysuit. "This is your armor." I slowly approached it, still trying to wrap my head around all that was happening around me. It's made from an alloy that can only be found one place in the entire multiverse. It's got plate armor over a bodysuit crafted from a nanotech made from the same metal. There isn't a weapon on Earth that could scratch it. I outfitted it with everything you could think of. Night vision, thermal vision, a built-in EMP system, HUD displays. Hell, it can even turn invisible. My mind started buzzing as I stared at it. That was when I noticed that I could hear his heartbeat. It was steady, but I could hear it nonetheless. He looked at me, and as if he read my mind, he said, "Yeah, the serum enhances some of your senses. Hearing, speed, strength. You'll catch on. The hearing is the worst part. Now put it on. We've got time for one training mission before we start operations." "Training mission? I thought the training came before the missions," I asked. "We don't have that kind of time," he replied. The suit was weirdly comfortable. It fit snugly, but not tight. It was easy to move around in. To say it was advanced was an understatement though. The HUD device even read my vitals at all times. I stood there, loading a Scar L when Horseman walked out with a sword in his hand. "You're going to need this," he said. I put the gun on my back and it clung to it like a magnet. I took the sword and examined it. It was also sleek in design. It was modeled after a gladius, but the blade was maybe 10 inches longer. When I gripped the handle, the black blade began to glow a neon blue color. My HUD flashed with a rising temperature warning. I put the sword on my back right next to the gun. The blade went back to black as I did so. "I take it the sword is made out of the same stuff as the armor," I said. "Correct," the Horseman replied. "So, what is this training mission?" I asked. "I'll be dropping you off on an island. Your task on said island will be to eliminate all hostile forces with extreme prejudice." "Okay, who are the hostile forces?" I asked. Horseman smiled, then snapped his fingers. The next thing I knew, I was standing on a beach underneath the light of a full moon. The waves danced softly as my HUD went to work, examining the surrounding area. "What the hell?" I asked. "What was that?" "That was a teleportation spell," Horseman's voice replied over my comlink. "Did you just say spell?" I asked. "Mr. Grayson, you just came back from the dead. Is a magic spell really that far out of the question?" I took a deep breath. "Fine. Where are my targets?" I turned to face away from the beach, revealing a thick tropical tree line. "There's a small village about a click north of you. Head there." I made my way through the jungle. The whole area was deathly silent. My mind pondered on a few different things as I did so. Opilia being the main thing. What had Shaw told her? Why couldn't my team know I was alive? I mean, I understood for operation's sake, plausible deniability and whatnot. But I didn't agree. We were spies and soldiers. We kept secrets for a living. I heard it before I saw it. The groaning coming from the village. I readied my rifle. I wasn't sure what I was expecting to see as I made my way into the clearing just before the village. But 2 bloody men munching on the intestines of a woman wasn't it. Horseman, what am I looking at? One of the men's heads snapped up. My HUD zoomed in on his face. His eyes were both pale and milky. His mouth was soaked in blood and gore. My heart shuddered a bit. The man gave off an ungodly screech as he shot to his feet and started in full sprint in my direction. I raised my rifle and riddled him in the chest with a barrage of lead. But he didn't even slow down.
The hit, Trent. Shoot him in the head.
I raised my rifle and fired. The man's face caved in and his body went limp. The next one came at me just as fast. I shot him as well. Everything went silent.
Your heart rate is accelerated,
said Horseman. No shit, I replied. Were those fucking zombies? I asked as I looked at the dead woman with her entrails hanging out.
Technically, yes. We refer to them as Revenants.
Revenants?
Yes.
I looked at the village. The place was a wreck. Blood soaked the small wooden buildings. Body parts were strewn about. The smell of decay and rotting meat permeated throughout the air. What happened here? I asked.
Do you remember the weapon you stole?
Lazarus? I asked.
Yes. This village was used as a testing ground.
I can remember growling under my breath. Gideon, I grumbled.
Yes and no.
The doorway to one of the buildings ahead of me rumbled. I raised my rifle again. Another revenant burst out and charged me. I fired my rifle once. Its body hit the dirt with a thud. What do you mean?
The pathogen that revives the body is demonic in nature. I've been trying to figure out where they got it, which is part of the reason we're here.
I kept walking through the center of the village, taking in the carnage around me. My HUD lit up again. Demonic energy signature located. My heart rate escalated even more. Are you saying Gideon made a deal with a demon? I asked.
No, demons can't come to Earth anymore. And if they did, they could only be summoned into an area that's been warded enough for them to stay on our plane of existence. A possessed person maybe. Could be a witch. If you can find them and kill them, it should take care of the Revenant problem on this island.
I walked further into the village. I'd only seen 3 revenants. The village consisted of around 8 or 9 small wooden buildings, most of which were covered in blood. The smell of death got even worse as I reached the other side of the village. That was where I found the mass grave. My heart jumped into my throat. There was a pit filled to the brim with bodies. Most were torn to shreds. All looked as if they had been dead for a week. I stared at the pit for a second. This was undoubtedly Gideon's work, trying to cover up their tracks. I exhaled, my HUD still reading the demonic energy signature. Except it was coming from the pit. What now? I asked. Horseman didn't respond. He didn't have a chance, as a woman's voice giggled from the tree line beyond the pit. I raised my rifle. At the edge of the trees stood a woman in a knee-length white dress. Her face was rotting, almost like that of a corpse. I could see her decaying teeth through where her cheek used to be. My HUD scanned her.
Possessed female identified.
A robotic voice said into my ear. I was just about to blow this thing's head off when an arm shot out of the pit and grabbed my ankle. I looked down to see a pair of glowing red eyes staring up at me. I pointed my rifle and fired. The Revenant below me yanked my leg with an unexpected force. I lost my footing and fell backward, the red-eyed Revenant leaping on top of me, now a missing chunk of its face from where I shot it, its blackened teeth gnashing and chomping at my armor. I managed to get my forearm up and into the creature's mouth. Its teeth shattered like glass on my armor as I used my other hand to grab a chunk of its black hair and yank back. The creature's scalp ripped off with a wet squelch. I almost gagged in my mouth when it happened as I thrust my forearm forward and twisted my body. The Revenant and I ended up switching places. I was now on top of the walking corpse, my free hand shooting to my sword. I lopped the creature's head off with the burning blue blade. Its body went limp. That was when something slammed into my back. I barely held onto my sword as I was sent face first into the dirt. Several more Revenants had jumped out of the pit and onto my back. I rolled as best as I could, wildly swinging my sword. I'm not sure how, but I made it to my feet, only to find myself surrounded by Revenants on all sides. There had to have been at least 24, all of which had bullet holes in them from Gideon's mercenaries.
They weren't covering up their tracks. They were giving it fresh corpses,
Horseman said from the comlink. I gritted my teeth and readied myself for an onslaught. The Revenants all jumped towards me at once, and the fight was on. I hacked and slashed, body parts were severed, heads rolled across the dirt. I wish I could say these things put up more of a fight. I wish I could say that I was winded when it was over. But I wasn't. My muscles didn't even hurt. Perks of being a super soldier, I guess. I stood there with the now doubly deceased Revenants' bodies all around me. My eyes locked on that possessed girl. There was a hint of fear in her pale eyes. She turned to run, but the moment she turned, Horseman was standing behind her. "Hello, girl," he said as his hand shot out and grabbed her by the throat. "Which one of Abaddon's minions are you?" he asked as he held her off the ground. The corpse laughed, but not like a feminine laugh from earlier. This one was full-on deep and demonic. "You can't stop what's coming, Horseman," it said. I walked up next to them, my eyes not leaving the woman for a second. I was in awe, but not really surprised at this point. It was just another thing that I was seeing today that wasn't supposed to exist. Let me guess, Victor summoned you, and in exchange for some Revenant blood, you got a semi-comparable corpse in a small village to tear through. Am I wrong? Horseman asked. The corpse struggled against the Horseman's grasp. "You can't interfere. It's against the rules," it snarled. "Wrong. I can interfere when a situation calls for it. A possessed corpse giving away the secrets of the Revenant pathogen. That's one such situation, wouldn't you think?" The thing's eyes locked on me, then back on Horseman. Horseman dropped it to the ground. "Trent, kill this thing." I slashed the corpse's head off with one swing. Horseman snapped his fingers, and we were back in the armory. I took the helmet off. I had a ton of questions, but before I could say anything, he cut me off. "We need to figure out where Gideon is keeping its samples. I need to see what they're doing with this pathogen." "They've probably cleared out the Grosny facility," I said. "I know. Did the defector say anything about any other facilities?" he asked. "No." Horseman thought for a second. "If you need to see the pathogen, why not extract it from one of the dead Revenants?" I asked. He held up a vial of blood. "I did, but I don't think Victor Marks has any use for the base pathogen. I think he wants to mutate it. I'm just unsure of how." He thought for a few seconds more before turning and looking at me. "How would you like to go vampire hunting?" "I'm gonna assume I don't have a choice," I said. Horseman smirked. "Also, it seems you're in need of a call sign." I raised my brow. It made sense, seeing as how I was to be operating off the books. Anonymity was important. "What you have in mind?" A few hours later, I found myself standing on a ledge overlooking a small beat-down warehouse. The sun was coming up any second. The skies had already begun changing color. "How does one kill a vampire?" I asked.
Cut off its head or stab it through the heart with a silver blade. Although your sword should be able to do the trick just as handily.
Horseman replied. "Seems easy enough," I said as I inhaled. I heard the suit's camouflage system activated. To the naked eye, I was invisible. I watched as a beat-up red pickup pulled into the warehouse parking lot. It came to a stop right by the front door, and out stepped a tall and lanky man. My hood zoomed in on him, revealing a thin pale face and piercing blue eyes. The man looked worn out. "Is that him?" I asked.
Jonathan Crowley. He specializes in obtaining things for the Eastern Vampire Coven.
"He's a human?" I asked. I could hear Horseman chuckle.
He was once, before he became a student of LaFay. But that's a story for another time. You've got a job to do.
Infiltrating the warehouse was easy. It was even easier than I had anticipated since I was wearing the suit. As mentioned before, the warehouse wasn't large. It was maybe half the size of a grocery store. There were rows of dusty storage shelves that held wooden crates on them. I examined the label on one closely. It read, Gideon Pharmaceuticals. "You seeing this?" I asked.
Not too surprising.
Horseman said. "What do you think is in here?" I asked. The HUD scanned the box. The box had a refrigerated case in it that held several bags of O-type blood. "He's storing blood," I said.
He sells to vampires. What did you expect?
Horseman said with a hint of annoyed attitude. My mission was to get into the warehouse and snag one of Crowley's buyers. Horseman had gotten intel that there was a deal going down soon, so I was to wait inside the warehouse until they got there. It didn't take long for a blacked-out SUV to show up. Crowley stood at one of the garage doors, while two of his men carried one of the wooden crates his way. I watched from atop one of the shelves. The doors of the black SUV opened, and out stepped the man that made my HUD system come to life. The man was tall and bald. He had a short beard and dark clothing. "I think I found a vampire," I said.
Dmitry Raslov. He's dangerous. Formerly a member of Moria's Black Guard.
"Moria?" I asked.
She is the head of the Eastern Vampire Coven.
I watched Dmitry as he stopped ahead of Crowley. "You lost weight," Dmitry greeted. "I've been dieting. Here is your order," Crowley said abruptly. "What's wrong, Mr. Crowley? Don't want to chat?" "I want to be paid." Dmitry rolled his eyes. I aimed my rifle at the back of Crowley's head. Dmitry reached into his jacket and pulled a stack of money out. The two of Crowley's men put the crate down at Dmitry's feet. The vampire knelt and ripped the top off with little effort. Underneath was revealed to be another pressurized container with a Gideon G stamped onto it. He hit a button and the container opened with a hiss. He reached inside. I thought he was going to pull some blood out. I really did. But instead, his head emerged from the container with a skull. "What the fuck?" I asked. My head zoomed in on the skull. It was covered in symbols that were identified as runes. Runes that started to glow a neon blue color when he touched it.
It's just a rune skull,
Horseman said. "What does it do?" I asked.
Rune skulls are taken from dead magic practitioners. They can be very powerful sources of magical energy. Be careful.
I adjusted the aim of my rifle. "Are they bulletproof?" I asked.
Nemesis? I don't think.
The horseman was interrupted by a sudden scream as a naked man was pulled kicking and screaming from the back of Dimitri's SUV by two more vampires. I watched as Crowley threw his hands up in an annoyed manner. The two of Crowley's henchmen recoiled in disgust before Crowley dismissed them with a hand wave. "What is this, Dmitri?" he asked. This is a thief. We caught him stealing. I know what a thief is, you fucking bloodsucker. What is he doing here? I don't keep bodies on my properties. Dimitri held up the skull. I meant fresh bodies, you imbecile. Relax, I'm just testing the skull, Dimitri said as he placed his free hand on the screaming man's forehead. The man screamed one last vocal cord shattering scream before his eye sockets began to glow as his insides boiled. Dimitri laughing maniacally as the ruined skull did its grisly work. The man crumpled to the ground. I sat there in shock.
You need to move,
Horseman's voice said. I readjusted my aim and fired. The ruined skull flew from Dimitri's hand. His eyes shot up to my general vicinity, but I was still cloaked. Crowley turned and started looking around. Where did that? He didn't get to finish his sentence as I fired another round into his chest. The man collapsed onto the ground. And that was when I noticed Dimitri's eyes lock onto me. Shit, I said. There! Dimitri shouted as his two vampiric henchmen started making their way toward my direction. I flicked the selector switch on my rifle to full auto. The vampires were fast. They moved in almost a blur. Or they would have, if they had been going after a normal man. I unloaded my rifle at them as they zoomed up the side of the shelf. I went to pull my sword, but one was already in my face. I was being kicked to the ground. I hit the floor after a 20-foot drop with a hard thud, dropping my sword. I got to my feet to find the other henchman in my face. A dagger was coming down onto my shoulder, but my armor held and the blade shattered on impact. Now it was my turn. I threw a left cross at the vampire's cheek. The punch landed, maybe a bit harder than the creature was expecting, as my armored knuckles tore flesh and bone from his face. The vampire fell to the floor as I turned and dove for my sword, my hand grabbing it just as the other vampire tackled me to the ground. There was a short scuffle. He tried and failed to claw through my armor. I managed to swing my sword one good time, and he stopped moving. His head bounced across the floor. I shot to my feet as the other henchman stumbled to his. He hissed at me, showing his sharpened teeth. I shoved my burning blue blade through his face in response before my eyes met Dimitri, who held the skull in one hand again, a bullet hole now marking above the eye. "Who are you?" he asked with a smile. I didn't answer. I took 2 powerful strides towards him. My goal was to capture him to be interrogated. But he was no slouch. He lifted the skull in my direction and cackled, right before the thing's eyes began to glow blue. A warning signal shot through my HUD. Energy blast imminent. I quickly leapt to one side as 2 white-hot burning beams of energy came flying at me. I dodged them by a few inches, landing behind a shelf in the warehouse. But the beams didn't stop coming for me. They cut through the shelf's support columns, causing it to collapse loudly. The next thing I knew, the warehouse was up in flames. I got to my feet as the place began to burn around me. The grip of my sword tightened. I heard feet shuffling behind me. I turned to see Dimitri with the skull aimed to my direction. "Fuck," I said as the eyes ignited blue. I didn't get the chance to dodge the beam. It hit me square in the chest, but to my surprise, the armor held perfectly, the beam reflecting off and slicing through a nearby wall. I watched Dimitri's smile transform to a look of pure and utter terror. He turned to run, but before he could, I'd already thrown my sword at him, the point landing in the back of his thigh. He screamed in pain as he collapsed to the floor. I walked over to him as he tried to crawl away. "I have him," I said as I yanked my sword out with a squelch. That was when I heard more movement. My eyes shot forward, where Crowley staggered to his feet. He sneered at me. I readied myself for a fight, raising my glowing blue sword. Crowley's eyes shot to my sword. Then they grew large. "You're an Omega?" I didn't answer. Dimitri growled from underneath me as I stepped on his wounded leg. Crowley's eyes seemed fearful. He instinctively stepped back, then snapped his fingers and disappeared. "That pussy," Dimitri growled. I replied to that with a boot to his face. Then I heard a snap. The next thing I knew, we were in the armory again. Horseman was standing there with one hand in a pocket and the ruined skull in the other. Dimitri took one look at him and recoiled in fear. "You?" he yelped. Horseman squatted down to get face to face with him. "Hello, Dimitri. What's it been? 100 years?" "Not long enough. What do you want?" "I need information, and some of your blood." Dimitri looked confused. "What information could I give you?" "Well, for one, I didn't realize that the Eastern Vampire Coven was getting their cloned blood from Gideon." "We buy it from Crowley." "No, Crowley is a middleman who arranges the deals. I've known him longer than you have." "I don't..." Horseman tapped Dimitri on the forehead, and he passed out. My eyes went large as Horseman stood up to face me. "Why do we need his blood?" I asked. "Well, for one, vampires and revenants are both derived from the same pathogen, albeit with different mutations. It's a working theory, but I wonder if Victor means to try and blend the two somehow." "Why would you think that?" I asked. Horseman thought for a second. "We're going to interrogate our friend here. Hopefully we can see where exactly Crowley was picking up his stuff. I'd bet that Gideon has some files we can take." "Why not just capture Crowley?" I asked. "Trust me, this is easier," Horseman said with a smirk. We interrogated Dimitri when he woke up. Well, it wasn't much of an interrogation. Horseman did some kind of mind-reading spell on him that revealed the Gideon facility that Crowley received his product from was a storage facility in the Alaskan wilderness. One that Horseman was undoubtedly going to send me to. He gave me a good couple hours to prep for the mission. That and to rest. I studied the report he'd given me closely. It was all information he'd plucked from Dimitri's head before he teleported him off. As I studied, my thoughts drifted to Opilia. I could remember the last time we'd been together. We'd been on a mission in Juarez to do surveillance on a cartel boss called Carlos Esteves. The mission went sideways and he tried to assault her. She killed him for it, and we had to escape. We made it back to the safe house, and one thing led to another. At least, until Chad walked his happy ass in. I missed her. I missed her a lot. She was always so strong and straightforward. She always knew what she wanted. I imagined at that moment that what she wanted was revenge on Jamie. The Alaskan facility was codenamed Site 73. We didn't get much from Dimitri, other than the name and that it was a storage facility, so we weren't entirely sure what to expect. Horseman and I discussed doing surveillance, but he pointed out that Crowley probably used teleportation spells to get in and out, so the facility was probably warded, which meant that unauthorized teleportation inside would be nigh impossible. But we needed to go inside regardless. We needed to access any files on Lazarus we could find. We should have gone after Crowley, I said as I leaned back in my chair. Horseman scoffed. Even if we caught him, getting information could prove difficult. Why? I asked. Most magicians have fail-safe spells for when they get caught. They're tricky to decipher. Are you saying you couldn't? I asked. I could, but Crowley is I've dealt with him before. It's complicated. I took a deep breath. Well, shit, what about one of his lackeys? I asked. Horseman raised a brow at me. That could work. Are there any left alive? They weren't involved in the fight. Horseman vanished with a snap, then reappeared a few seconds later. They died in the fire, he said sternly. I groaned. Horseman held up a hand containing a file. I did find this though, he said as he tossed it in front of me. What is it? I asked. A file. No shit, I asked as I opened it. Inside was a note from Crowley that read, "Here's my file on Site 73. Now, stay out of my business." I eyed Horseman. That was convenient. He shrugged. He knows who he's dealing with. I told you, it's complicated. I sighed as I looked over the file. It confirmed what Horseman was worried about. The facility was warded on the inside. It was also mostly underground. I would need to get in through the front door. That was the easy part. The hard part would be getting to the front door. There was a reason Gideon had chosen that area. More supernatural shit that I didn't understand yet. This one about the guards of the facility. A skinwalker and 3 to 4 wendigos. Ah shit. I mumbled to myself as I fished the picture of the wendigo from the file. The creature looked absolutely horrifying. It was tall and had an emaciated humanoid body with thin pale white skin. It had an almost dog-like snout and a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth as well as 2 antlers atop its head. Okay, how do I kill it? I asked. The horseman chuckled. Your sword, Mr. Grayson. It can kill anything short of an angel or archdemon, but you have to hit the heart, he said before taking a breath. However, you need to be wary of the skinwalker. They like to play mind games, make you see memories, loved ones. I've warded off your suit best I can. But, I asked, it will protect you from any psychic attacks, but skinwalkers are shapeshifters by nature. Remember that, Trent. Just because you're protected from psychic attacks doesn't mean that it can't play mind games with you. A little while later, I found myself stalking through the cold Alaskan wilderness. The snow crunching beneath my boots with every step. I was maybe a mile from the facility, my hut scanning the woods ahead of me. The thermometer read 12 degrees, but my suit kept me warm. The forest was silent and covered in a white layer of snow. I trudged along, ever vigilant. That was when my hut picked up something. A body in the distance. I approached it cautiously. The dead bear's fur was matted in blood, and its entrails had been completely removed. Crimson decorated the trees and ground around me. You seeing this? I asked as I scanned the ground. Whatever had done this hadn't left any tracks whatsoever. I could feel my heart rate escalate. Wendigo? I asked.
Likely,
said Horseman. I continued moving around, now aware that these things could kill full-grown grizzly bears with ease. I didn't make it far, however, when I heard a branch move from behind me. I slowly grabbed my sword from my back and ignited the neon blue blade. I turned quickly, just as the creature leapt from a nearby tree, its pale skin already covered in crimson liquid. I slashed my sword at it, gashing its side before shoving the point into its throat. The piece went limp as I yanked the blade out. It collapsed to the snow. I looked down at my good work when I heard the horseman's voice call out to me.
Destroy the heart, Trent.
I didn't have the time to register this, as the wendigo suddenly flew to its feet with an upward swipe of its clawed hand, letting out a shrill roar that echoed across the snow-colored forest. I was sent sailing into a nearby tree, which snapped in half from the sheer force of my impact. I struggled to sit up in the snow, but the beast was already on top of me, clawing and biting at my armor. I stabbed it once in the ribs, then twice, then a flurry of times. Blood spewed out from the wound like water from a fountain before it howled in pain and went limp. I pushed the body off of me and got to my feet. I was almost out of breath and irritated with myself. That was when I heard more movement. I turned quickly, where 3 more wendigo had begun emerging from the trees. I steadied myself for a fight, now more angry than anything. They charged in with a growl. I charged back. I was ready this time, killing the first with a quick stab to the heart before flinging its body into the second. The second fell to the ground while I shoved my sword into the third's chest. It fell down dead. I then turned my attention to the second one as it shoved its brother's body off of itself. It let off a shrill cry as it charged in. I again braced myself. It swiped its claw at me. I dodged it and shoved the point of my sword into its chest. The beast went limp as it fell to the ground. I stood over the bodies of the Wendigos for a few moments, looking down at my precise work. Now, where's the skinwalker? I asked myself.
Keep walking towards the facility. I'm sure you'll find it.
Very funny, I replied. I made it to the charcoal grey steel door of Site 73 within a few minutes. It looked like the entrance to a bunker. I studied it closely. The facility was indeed underground, the only entrance being the door I was staring at. It wasn't large by any means, not like a super bunker you'd find government officials hiding under, but it was big enough to fit a small car through. The doorway was also in a clearing, and based on the structure, I assumed it led to a ramp. I looked around. There were no roads or humanoid footprints. I looked back at the door. How do I open this thing? I asked. That was when my suit heard something. Something chittering in the distance. Something I recognized myself as a former soldier. Did we call in air support? I asked as I hit the cloaking device on my suit and leapt atop the bunker doorframe. A black commercial chopper flew over the tree line before coming to a stop right above the clearing. Ropes fell out the sides and men in black uniforms fast roped down. I put my sword on my back and pulled my rifle. The 4 soldiers landed in formation, aiming their weapons around in a tactical manner. I leveled my weapon with the lead one's head. I'm not seeing any signs of a breach, the leader said as he approached the doorway.
Gideon security forces. Careful how you engage. They probably have more nearby.
Horseman said over comms. The lead soldier looked down at his feet and knelt. I've got tracks, he said. Shit, I grumbled. Another of the soldiers stopped next to the leader. So, they take out 4 Wendigo and then just disappears before entering the facility? He asked. The leader looked straight at where I was crouching. I don't think... I didn't hesitate before firing. I shot the man in the face, the next guy in the throat, and the next 2 in their heads. The chopper started to fly away, the fast ropes still hanging down into the snow. At guessed they forgot to release them, or the releasing mechanism jammed. Either way, I didn't care.
Don't let the chopper escape,
Horseman said. How? I started as I ran towards the chopper, placing the rifle on my back as I did so. I managed to grab onto one of the fast ropes with one hand at the last second before it ventured over the tree line, clinging on for dear life as it began to drag me back into the forest. Branches broke over my armor as my hut went ballistic. My free hand flailed around until it found a very thick branch and clung onto it. To my surprise, the chopper came to a sudden and abrupt stop in the air as I held it in place by its fast rope. I was straining hard as I pulled the rope. The chopper's engine roared as it tried to escape. Until finally, the ropes released and I was dropped to the forest floor. The chopper pilot, however, lost control of his craft and it was sent careening into the forest, slamming into the ground in a bright orange explosion. I got to my feet again, now knowing that I really needed to hurry. I practically ran back to the doorway. When I got there, however, I came to a screeching halt. My heart had jumped into my throat when I saw it. I went weak in the knees as my eyes met hers. She looked so frail and cold. Her once brown hair was matted in blood, and her face looked frostbitten. It was Opilia. My Opilia. Trent? Is that you? She asked. Trent, it's so cold out here, she cried. I stood there in shock for a moment or two, just staring her down. Trent, I miss you, she cried. I'm not sure the skinwalker had any clue that my hut had already figured out that the thing I was staring at wasn't human. But it figured out when my sword ignited. Opilia straightened up, smiling wickedly as she did so. All right then, How about this one? The creature's skin rippled and morphed. The change was almost instantaneous. Suddenly, I wasn't staring at Opilia anymore, but into the green eyes of the man who'd taken my life. The one who'd separated Opilia and I. Jamie King stood before me, a joint hanging from his mouth as he stroked his ginger goatee. "What's wrong, Trent? You look like you've seen a ghost." I didn't have time for games. I took 2 power steps towards him and tried to take his head. The skinwalker vanished, reappearing on the top of the door structure. "Did I strike a nerve?" Jamie asked. "You're not Jamie," I growled. "No?" it said as it morphed again. This time I was now staring into the mustached face of my best friend Chad. "How about a friendly face?" it asked before vanishing again. I tightened the grip onto my sword.
"Don't let it play games with you,"
Horseman said over comms. My grip tightened even harder. "Ah, Agent Trent Grayson. Best to ever do it." The skinwalker mocked in my best friend's voice as it reappeared behind me. I turned to it. But an invisible force sent me sailing into the steel door. "Oh, how the spirits talk about you," it said, morphing yet again. The chosen herald of death himself pulled back to the land of the living. I could feel as the force pushed me against the wall even harder. I found myself looking into the eyes of a young girl. The same young girl that Chad had accidentally shot. "But are you worthy of a second chance? With all the pain you've caused?" I growled as I strained against the force. "You're nothing but a killer." I strained even harder, managing to get a thumb around one of the pins of the flashbangs on my waist. I pulled it. There was a bright light that would have been blinding to anyone who wasn't wearing a suit built by the Horseman. The little girl shielded her eyes. I shot forward, my hand finding her neck and my sword making its way into her guts. Her eyes went wide. "I am a killer," I growled as I jammed the blade in deeper. She morphed again, this time turning into an old, native-looking woman that I'd never seen before. I dropped her to the ground before turning back to the doorway. There wasn't any kind of scanner, no keyhole. I took a second to think. I wasn't sure how to go about doing this. Then, the thought occurred to me. I wondered if the sword could cut through the steel. I raised the weapon and stabbed the doorway. To my surprise, it went through like a knife through butter. It took a few minutes of cutting before I made it through. The facility was surprisingly empty of people. It was also surprisingly simple, being a warehouse with more of these pressurized containers, none of which contained any test batches of Lazarus. Luckily, there was also a computer inside, a massive computer that took up the entire wall. I approached it, and my suit began to hack into the files inside. "Intuitive," I grunted. Files flashed before my eyes. "Search keyword Lazarus," I commanded the suit. We found the file quickly. The only issue, the file itself was locked. I couldn't bypass it either.
"We can't access the file from this server. We need to go to the main one."
"Where's that?"
"There's 2 facilities, one in New York, one in Tokyo."
Gideon HQ. We'd never be able to break into the New York facility. It's the most heavily guarded building in the world. I said as I got up and headed for the exit.
"So, Tokyo,"
Horseman said. "Not as heavily guarded. Still dangerous. But we need those files."
"Well then, let's get started."
I stood at the exit, looking out at the bodies that still lay in the snow ahead of me, the tree line smoking from the helicopter crash. My mind pondered with the encounter with the skinwalker. I killed all these people. Whether I was a monster or not was debatable. I had purpose now, even after my own death. Now servant of the literal horseman of death himself. I am what the world needed me to be. I am a weapon. I am Nemesis. I never liked killing people. I know that sounds weird, given my profession, but I always saw it as just part of the job. By the time I'd been killed myself, I'd racked up quite a kill count. Officially, according to the CIA records, it had been at 73. But deep down, I knew that number was wrong. It's funny, I'd never really thought about it before I died. Them, I mean, the ones whose lives I'd ended. The only death that I'd been responsible for, that I'd even felt remotely guilty about, was that poor girl in Amsterdam. But I didn't even pull the trigger. Killing people, to me, was always just an unfortunate consequence to complete the job. I can remember shortly before Jamie shot me in the back, I'd had a conversation with Chad. I was fresh off of my argument with Jamie. As mentioned, he had gotten me shot during our operation, then tried to gaslight me into thinking that being high on an operation was the same level of violation as dating a teammate. He then brought up the Amsterdam incident. The argument was short and heated. Tempers flared. He was inside the vehicle, as I was pulling the briefcase containing Lazarus out to check it. "Since when have you become a beacon of morality? You know we're not the good guys. You don't really care that Chad shot that kid. You just want to tear everyone else down because you're too damn insecure to admit you made a mistake. You better sober up on missions, or you won't be going on them with me," I growled before I slammed the van door shut. I walked the briefcase over to the hood of the van and opened it. Chad followed me. What's with the "we're not the good guys" comment? I can remember being perplexed. He knew the answer to that question. At least, I thought he did. "Why does it matter?" I asked. "Because I don't want to be the bad guy," he said. That was something that stuck with me, even in death. Truthfully, I never thought we were evil, just men and women doing a job. Sometimes the job was bad. I'd never once thought to focus on it though. My focus was always on my team. Getting them out in one piece was everything. I stood next to the Horseman in the middle of a desert. The sun was in the process of rising, bathing the sky in an orange haze. There was a slight breeze in the air, one that I could almost feel through my armor. "Who are we meeting here?" I asked, as three figures crested in the sand dune ahead of us. All three were adorned in white cloaks and hoods, covering their faces. "Allies." The three figures came to a stop a few paces ahead of us. They removed their hoods, revealing two males and a female. The lead male, Raziel, was a tall and broad black man. To the right of him, the dark-haired and olive-skinned Rain. To the left stood an Arabic-looking man called aeolaer. The Horseman greeted them by their names. My suit's HUD started reading off insane amounts of energy coming from their very bodies. Energy that my suit read off as angelic essence. I admit, I was fixated on the trio. I was standing before literal angels. Yet, they looked like normal people. The conversation between them and the Horseman was short. I honestly missed most of it. Before I knew it, they were walking away and the Horseman was snapping his fingers. Angelic allies, I pondered, thinking out loud as the Horseman walked to his computer. We have angelic enemies as well. Now, get some rest. You're gonna need it. I slept and dreamt mostly of Opilia. I dreamt about our last night together. I hadn't seen her in months before I was killed. Now, I didn't know if I'd ever see her again. I was awoken by Horsemen walking into my quarters. I could feel the plane bouncing with turbulence underneath me. What do you want? I asked. It's time. I exhaled as I got to my feet. There was work that needed to be done. A few moments later, I was in my armor. Horseman sat on a computer close by. I've been meaning to ask, ever since the fight with that skinwalker. Yes, I am a literal horseman from the Bible, Horseman said without looking up. How did you know that was what I was going to ask? I can see everything you see while you're in the suit, Mr. Grayson. I assumed you'd ask sooner. I'm working for the Grim Reaper? That's fucking awesome, I said sarcastically. Wait, how'd you meet Shaw? I asked. Shaw used to be in a unit that hunted down supernatural threats. No shit. Horseman looked at me and shrugged. The building isn't worded to teleportation spells. How do you know? I asked. Horseman typed on his computer some more. The screen ahead of me lit up. Horseman was standing at a desk across from a sitting figure. A figure that looked familiar, even more so when he shot to his feet and punched his desk in two. Angelic enemies. He wore a white suit with a dark red tie. His blue eyes filled with rage as he shouted something at Horseman. You were there recently, having an argument? Trying to convince Victor to stop before the world ends. And here I thought the 4 horsemen were supposed to help end the world. Horseman laughed. If only it were so simple. The horsemen exist to prevent humanity from going extinct. The reason people assume that we're harbingers of the end is because we used to take 100 years shifts where only one of us would defend Earth Prime. All 4 of us being together would usually be a sign of a catastrophic event. He went back to typing. The room went silent. I'd gone back to thinking. My mind is now curious about something else. Where's Opilia and her team? Chasing a lead in Mexico. They're alive? They couldn't chase leads if they weren't. Are you ready? I'm going to teleport you inside the building. What if Victor's there? The screen in front of me switched again, now showing a news report by a group called The Random Onion. Victor was being hounded by reporters as he was being led into Gideon Tower in New York City. The headline read, Morales BioWare unveils Easy Pill variant. He's got a lot on his plate right now. He's gonna have Hector Morales killed, isn't he? I asked. He already tried. Hector's got good security. A light bender to be precise. Which leads me to my next point of emphasis. You may run into a light bender or two while on this operation. What's a light bender? I asked. A human with angelic heritage. Their order was created to hunt rogue gods. They're dangerous, but they aren't our enemies. So should you have an encounter, don't kill them. They may be allies in the coming struggle. I did a mock salute. Horseman rolled his eyes and snapped his fingers. I found myself in a hallway, very quickly cloaking my suit just as a couple of armed guards came walking around the corner. Where's the mainframe? I asked as I leaned back against the wall so the guards wouldn't run into me.
Victor's office. I put you on the same floor. You just need to get there.
Horseman replied. I followed the hallway until I reached the doorway that led straight into the office. I hadn't seen any more guards along the way. It was a massive heavy wooden door. I exhaled as I reached for the handle. I tried to turn the knob, but it was locked. Well, that's unfortunate, I said. Can you teleport me inside? I asked.
I just tried. It didn't work.
He warded his office? I asked.
Probably.
I rolled my eyes and kicked the door open. The moment I did so, however, an alarm went off. Oh, come on, I groaned as I turned around.
Seriously, Nemesis, what did you expect?
Horseman griped into my comms. The hallway itself had marble floors and walls. It was well illuminated by the lights on the ceiling. I readied my rifle as the guards rounded the corner towards the room. I was still cloaked, so they couldn't see me. Not that it would help them if they did. The men were your typical Gideon security forces. They wore black tactical uniforms and wielded submachine guns. I stood still in the hallway against one of the walls, hoping that they wouldn't bump into me. There were 8 or 9 of them now. They were all very confused. And I'd be lying if I said I didn't find their confusion amusing. The lead mercenary looked at the door, which I'd kicked off its hinges, and then back at one of the bigger guys in the group. Did you do this, Lopez? He asked. I could see Lopez's eyes squint inside of his goggles. I was with you when the alarm went off. You were? The leader asked. What could have done this? That door is easily 400 pounds, another soldier said. My eyes shot to another soldier, one who had wandered a bit closer to me. He was within arm's reach. The leader shut the alarm off and got on his radio. Hey, Captain Grunk, there isn't anyone up here, he said. Yes, I know the door was kicked in, but there's no one up there. Yes, we did check Victor's office. What do you mean check under the desk? It's still broken. The soldier in front of me took a step backward, getting even closer. I took a step to the side. He backed into the wall, leaning right next to me. Maybe a ghost did it, he said to the leader. Shut up, Felix, the leader said. I'm just saying, shit's weird. I found myself holding my breath. I didn't want to kill these guys, but I would if I had to. That was when my HUD picked up on something. Something around the room. A goddamn fly. One that was coming straight for me. Oh, for fuck's sake, I muttered as it landed on me. I watched as Felix's eyes stared at it for a second, as if trying to figure out what was wrong with what he was seeing. Is that a fly? Walking on air? Flies can fly, dipshit, the leader said. No. Yes, they can. That's why they have wings. No, asshole. I mean, this fly is literally walking on. His eyes got really big. It's a fucking ghost. The whole group was now staring at the fly on my head. I knew they couldn't see me, but the fly had given away that I was there. I also knew that if I fired my rifle, they'd open fire and alert the rest of the building. So, while they all stared at the fly sitting on my head, I drew my sword. I had all 9 of them huddled around me, all close by. I watched them eagerly, seeing who would move first. It was the leader who reached his hand out and tried to swat the fly on my head. I knew I had to move fast. I swiped my sword up and lopped his arm off, then his head. Then I moved onto the next person, then the next. I moved in a blur, too fast for them to react. Within seconds, the marble hallway was covered in crimson puddles and body parts. I stood amongst the bodies for a second, my eyes looking up at the camera above me.
Don't worry about that. I managed to get into their security system. Hurry up, Nemesis.
Horseman's voice called over comms. I exhaled. I just killed 9 people over a fucking fly, I said as I walked into Victor's office. The room was big, as it took up nearly half of this entire floor. There was a large computer on one of the walls, a computer that was similar to the one I'd seen at the facility in Alaska. I stood near it as my suit took over, hacking through files and displaying them on my HUD. Show me files for Operation Lazarus, I said. The files that had been locked on the other server appeared in front of me. One of the files that crossed my face had a name, Grace Stone. The files loaded into my suit's CPU. More voices came from the hallway.
You've got light benders in the hallway,
Horseman's voice said. I looked up just as the 2 walked in the doorway. They didn't look how I'd expected. One was an Arabic male and the other was an Asian female. Both wore robes under a white and silver breastplate. The male had a weapon aimed at me. It looked almost like a crossbow, but my HUD identified it as a light energy blaster. The woman had a spear in her hand and 2 chakrams on her hips. They both stopped dead in their tracks when they saw me. I guess we double booked, I said casually, stepping away from the computer. Who are you? The woman asked sharply. My friends call me Nemesis. You wanna be my friend? I asked.
Did you seriously just ask her if she wanted to be friends?
Horseman asked over my comlink. I wanna know what you're doing here, the woman replied. I shrugged. Same as you, stealing shit. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to. You're coming with us. The Grandmaster might have some questions. I could see her grip tighten on her spear, and I could tell by the look in her eyes that she wasn't going to back down. I groaned as I pulled my sword from my back. You sure about this, lady? You're not gonna like how this goes. The woman growled as she suddenly thrust her spear at me. I caught it with my free hand right below the spear point, maybe an inch from my chest. The spear was glowing yellow and burning hot, my hut alarm blaring a warning about angelic essence. That was impressive, I said, right before knocking her spear to the ground with my sword. The woman froze with a look of shock upon her face. The moment I did this, the man fired his blaster, the white beam of energy deflecting off of my chest plate before scorching the floor and taking out a nearby window. "Seriously?" I asked. The woman regained her bearings and took a swing at me. I drop-kicked her, sending her sailing back into the man. The woman got to her feet quickly, pulling the chakrams from her hips, both of them glowing yellow and burning just as hot as her spear. I exhaled as I looked at him. "So, we're ripping off Tron now? I'm more of a Star Wars guy myself." I ignited my burning blue sword as the woman charged me. She was pissed, swinging wildly. I dodged most blows, blocked others, using her rage and impatience along with my own muscle memory to my advantage. It took a second or two, but I found an opening, reaching out and snatching her wrist with my free hand, bending it back just right to cause her to drop her chakram. She fell to her knees, gritted her teeth in pain as she did so. "Are we done yet?" I asked with a little more boom in my voice. She replied to this by slashing my leg with her other chakram. The weapon only bounced off my armor. "Oh, come on," I complained. "Let her go," the man said from in front of me, his blaster raised and his face full of annoyance. "Yeah, I'm going to, once she calms down." The man lowered his weapon upon hearing this. The woman hit me 1 or 2 times before dropping her weapon. At this point, I was more annoyed than anything. As fun as that was, I've got a tight schedule to keep. I left the system open in case you need it. Do yourself a favor, look at the files pertaining to Operation Lazarus. They might get your Grandmaster's attention, I said as I started to walk away. I was headed for the window, of course. I got to the edge when the annoyed woman called out to me. "Who are you?" she asked. I wondered the same thing, but I didn't really have an answer myself. Then it hit me. "A weapon," I said as I stepped out of the window. I was very quickly teleported into the armory. Horseman was sitting at the computer, looking at a picture of a man that I didn't recognize. "Who's that?" I asked. "This is David Stone. He was in Shaw's old CIA unit," Horseman said. I took my helmet off, then walked over to him. "Why is he in the Lazarus file then? Why does Gideon want him?" I asked. "They don't. They want his daughter." "His daughter?" David was the lead interrogator for the Supernatural Operations Department. He specialized in breaking vampires during a Cold War-style conflict that the CIA dubbed the Shadow War. Horseman exhaled as he thought for a moment. He left the department after he started a relationship with one of the Eastern Vampire Coven's royal family members. That relationship resulted in a daughter called Grace Stone. I cut him off. Horseman nodded. "He's got a vampire wife?" I asked. "Had. The leader of the coven, Madam Tippis, had her killed. She wanted the kid killed too, but it didn't work out. Since then, David's raised the child alone, getting occasional help from the Swiss guard." "Why does Gideon want the girl?" I asked. "I have a theory, but I'm not 100% sure." "What's the theory?" I asked. "To create both revenants and vampires, your host needs to first be dead. Grace has all the powers of a vampire without being completely dead. Her blood may be the key to creating a version of the revenant pathogen that can infect a living host." "So we need to find her?" I asked. Horseman nodded. "They have a satellite tracking her, but her dad's been doing a good job keeping her safe. They're at a safe house in Paris now, but the satellite Gideon is using to track her is very advanced. They've already got men set up. I need you on the ground. Get them out. Get them too." Horseman typed a bit more. "Safe house, 62B. "On the ground. I like it," I said, remembering which safe house that was. Horseman nodded. "I will get in touch with Shaw. 62B won't be a permanent solution, He won't like it. He hates Shaw. But it's not like he has a choice. I nodded as I put my helmet back on. Horseman stood up and handed me an old cell phone. "Give this to David. It's got Shaw's number in it." "You said he hates Shaw." "If he wants his daughter to survive, he'll use it." With that, he snapped his fingers. I found myself standing on the roof of a building. The Paris outskirts were covered in snow. My HUD already loaded with the location of the building that the stones were hiding at. I'd been teleported to a rooftop maybe a block away. I could see as a black SUV was driving up the building's front entrance. I knew I needed to hurry. I jumped from roof to roof, watching as the mercenaries in black uniforms exited their vehicles and started moving to the front door. I had cloaked myself as I made it to the roof of the target building. As soon as I stopped, Grace burst through the exit door on the roof, followed by a priest. I watched as Grace ran towards the edge facing the street, coming to a stop at the edge of the roof. "Shit," she said. "Language," the priest replied. "Seriously?" the girl replied with an annoyed voice. I watched them. The girl had a slender frame and raven black hair. Her skin was also extremely pale. I watched her closely. She was so young, yet she was calm despite everything. Gunfire suddenly erupted from inside the building below us. "Dad?" she asked sharply. "Your dad will be fine," the priest replied. That was when the door opened, and David Stone came running out. "Back already?" the priest asked. "They had some really big guns," said David. 4 mercenaries in black tactical uniforms burst through the doorway behind them with their weapons raised. David, Grace, and the priest had found themselves on the edge of the roof. I watched the lead mercenary as I readied my sword. "Drop your weapons and give us the girl," he said in an English accent. There was a standoff now. Things were silent, and no one knew I was there. "What do we do? It's not like we can jump," the priest asked. "We can't, but she can," David replied. Grace's face contorted in confusion. "What? I'm not leaving," but she was interrupted by the priest suddenly shoving her off the roof. "Shit!" I shouted as I suddenly leapt into action. I cut down 3 or 4 of the mercenaries in seconds, and I was about to slice the legs off of the lead one when Horseman's voice stopped me.
Not him. He could have more information.
I stayed my sword, instead delivering a right-hand cross that put him on his ass. I decloaked in front of David and the priest. "He's all yours," I said as I stepped past him, only stopping at the edge of the roof. Grace was on her back, staring up at me. 2 mercenaries loomed over her. I leapt down, landing in between them and slicing the nearest one's head from his shoulders, before stabbing the second one through his stomach. The bodies fell as I looked down at Grace. The girl looked horrified. I couldn't blame her though. I reached a hand for her. "Let's go, kid. Your dad is upstairs. He's fine. Maybe a little traumatized, but fine." I helped her up, and she ran past me back into the building. I followed her inside the safe house and up to the roof. As we got to the last floor, I came to a stop as I saw the naked vampire tied to a chair with silver wire. His body was missing half its head and covered in cuts. That was brutal. Even for me, that was brutal. I made it up to the roof a few seconds after Grace, where I found the priest holding the lead mercenary down. David's eyes found me very quickly, and as any good interrogator would, he started asking questions. "Who are you?" "A friend of a friend," I replied as I pulled the cell phone out and handed it to him. "What's this?" he asked. "It's got the coordinates of an underground safe house that's just outside the city. We're going to send you there to wait for our next move. The phone also has an old associate of yours' phone number. You need to call him." I could see David's face contort in annoyance. "You're one of Shaw's." I laughed. "Hell no, but he can help." The group, along with the prisoner they'd captured, were suddenly teleported away from me. I found myself standing face to face with Horseman, who'd teleported himself onto the roof. He had a serious look about him. One that screamed something bad was about to happen. I sent him to the safe house. David should be able to get information from the mercenary. I'm honestly scared for the mercenary, I admit it. I could see him exhale. He had something he wanted to tell me, but he was searching for the right words. What? I asked. Ophilia's team. They've been captured. A few moments later, we were back in the armory. Opilia had taken the team to Mexico to track Jamie. Jamie had set up a perfect trap. Now Opilia and her team had been taken. What do we do? I asked. We know they were taken from a Gideon hotel in Juarez. A Gideon hotel? I asked. Yes, they're only the largest company on the planet. They do more than just drugs. Medicine, hotels, mercenaries, mass murder, chemical weapons, zombies? Is Victor a Resident Evil fan? I asked. Horseman cocked his head to the side. What? Nothing. Where do we start? I cut into the hotel security feed. They were hit by a hit squad. It seems Chad was taken by Jamie. The rest of Ophilia's team was taken by Juarez police. The video screen in the armory came to life. On it showed Opilia cuffed to a chair. She looked up to see a figure walk in, one that made my blood run cold. Carlos Estevez stood ahead of her. My mind flashed back to that day in his mansion. To me, finding her with pieces of her dress cut off, and him in a puddle of his own blood. This was taken at Diablo's. How's he? I started. Same as you, I assume. Which brings up another issue. We need to figure out where he got it. I knew Diablos existed. It was a poorly held secret among the intelligence community in Mexico. The private prison of Carlos Estevez himself. It should have been destroyed when Opilia killed him. It was also an all-male prison, which made the hairs on my arm stand up. I was suddenly terrified for Opilia. So, she's being held in Diablos. That bastard. I growled under my breath. I'm willing to send you in, but there will be some rules. No contact with the team. Got it? They can't know. How am I supposed to rescue them if I can't make contact? I asked. The criminals that Estevez keeps there are all malevolently violent. Get in, shut down the power, get the cells open. Opilia and her team are very capable. They can escape during the chaos. Getting them out isn't your only assignment for when you're there. Let me guess, you want intel on Estevez? I asked. The warden was one of his cartel's top guys. I need a cell phone. Sounds easy enough. When do I go in? 10 hours from now. I wish I could say I spent the next 10 hours resting, but my anxiety had gotten the better of me. All I could think about was her. What had she gotten herself into? And for what? Revenge? Because I couldn't come back to her? I could feel the frustration withering me away. The 10 hours turned to 5, then to 2, then to 1. Each minute was agonizing. Eventually, the time came. Diablos held a legendary status amongst South American cartels. Rumors of it began during the early days of the Estevez dynasty, when the man had begun using his own cartel money to rebuild Juarez. He turned coal into diamond. His cartel removed thieves and rapists from the streets, low-level criminals. No one knew where they went at first, just that petty crime took a nosedive. Estevez looked like a hero. He was celebrated all over the country. Some of the other cartels started getting a little jealous, sending people into Juarez to try and soil the image. They vanished almost instantly. It was a Sicario that first spilled the metaphorical beans. He'd done some jobs for Estevez and wound up working as an informant for the CIA. He mentioned the prison in one of his debriefs. He'd taken at least 12 people there and left them. No judge, no jury, no trial. If you were even suspected of a petty crime, you went to Diablos. A lot of people wondered, of course, how Carlos had gotten hold of the facility. Some of the rumors involving a certain Pharmaceutical company, of course. There was talk about experiments being conducted on the prisoners underneath the prison, but no one ever made it out, so no one knew for sure. The Horseman reminded me maybe 3 more times that I wasn't to make contact with him before he teleported me inside the prison. When I arrived, I found myself standing in a supply closet, a darkened supply closet.
I'm in their security feed. Warden's office is just down the hall, and on the right.
Horseman's voice said through my comlink. I carefully opened the closet doorway and peered outside. Everything was calm. The hallway was brightly illuminated by the lights on the ceiling. I cloaked my suit and stepped out. I started making my way towards the warden's office. It didn't take long for me to get there. When I did, I found it empty. Just a small wooden desk, a file cabinet, and 4 walls. It was smaller than I'd expected. The desk was empty, not even a cell phone or a laptop on it. I very quickly turned and started rummaging through the filing cabinet. It didn't take me very long, but I found the prison blueprints, as well as the files on the lower levels of the prison. In particular, something called Project 43, or, as Carlos had dubbed it, the Ghost Legion. You see, when Opilia killed the good Carlos, the cartel split into factions. Rival cartels moved into Juarez. A war broke out over the months that followed. A war that suddenly ended over the course of one night. Most of the faction leaders either dying or disappearing. All in thanks to the re-emerging Daddy Esteves and his Ghost Legion.
That isn't good,
Horseman said into my comlink in an ominous tone. I'm guessing the warden's phone can wait, I said, examining the files myself.
Get to the security room. Once the riot starts, get to the sub-level.
My next task was to head towards the security control room. There, I could shut down the power and open all the cells. I also needed to track down the warden, but that didn't matter as much to me as it did to Horseman. Cloaking and getting to the security room wasn't hard. I only passed a few guards along the way. Perks of being invisible, I guess. The only downside was that there was no way I was going to be able to open the door without the guard inside noticing it. I had to think about this for a second. I knocked on the security door. I watched as the groggy security guard got up through the window on the door. The security room was small. It was almost the size of a large closet with a desk and a wall full of security monitors. The guard staggered over and looked out the window. I was still cloaked. He looked around and then rolled his eyes before walking back to his chair. I knocked again. He turned back to the door, his face full of aggravation and annoyance. I knocked again. He begrudgingly shot to his feet and yanked open the doorway. I drop-kicked him back into the room. He loudly crashed into the security monitors. I walked into the room and shut the door behind me. The man was out cold. I got onto their computer and started typing away. It took only a few seconds to find the cell they were keeping her. I clicked on it. The screen popped open with a live feed. She was sitting on her bed. There were 2 men in the cell with her. Both were CIA agents whose files I'd read. A tall, red-headed man called Ray Bussy and a short Filipino man who went by Miguel. If my files were correct, Miguel was a prodigal genius. He had built drones for DARPA before he joined the CIA. Ray was a former soldier. He was young too, one of the youngest men to ever join the agency. He had a black eye as well, almost like he'd taken a fist to the face. I didn't, however, see chat, which meant Jamie hadn't stuffed him here. That was a problem for another time. I watched Opilia for a minute. She looked so sad. I wanted to tell her I was alive. I wanted too bad. God, I missed her. I typed a little more. Suddenly, the prison system sprang to life. A countdown began. I'd essentially set all the systems to open the cells and then shut down. What I didn't realize was that there was a guard staring into the room behind me. I heard shouting coming from behind me. I turned just as the door flew open. The fight was on. The first guard opened fire in my direction. Alarms suddenly went off. I moved quickly, shoving my sword into his chest before moving to the next guard. Then the next, then the next. I slashed and cut my way into the hallway. More guards were waiting for me, their bullets bouncing off of my suit. I cut them down too. By then, the alarms were blaring and the cell doors had opened.
They've gotten out of their cell and are looking for a way out. Get to the sub-level.
Horseman said into my comlink. I did as told, running down a hallway into a dark winding staircase. The sub-level was filled with various labs that I knew from Project 43's files. The place was like a maze. Luckily, I knew exactly where I was going. It was a lab at the end of the maze, one where a man had been locked in what looked like a glass box. Only, the glass box had almost demonic-looking symbols painted in blood all over them. The body was that of a man, one clad in Roman-style armor. He knelt with his sword in the ground, sniffing the air as I came closer. His black eyes shut up and glared at me. That was when I realized his face seemed almost reptilian, being made from white scales. His nose was comprised of 2 slits, almost like that of a snake. He smiled at me, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. "Trent Grayson," it growled. "You know me?" I asked. "I know of you. The demons in hell, they long for your flesh." "They should get in line. What are you?" "You read the file. I am Legion." I readied my sword. I knew I was going to have to kill this thing. My hut was going nuts with the demonic energy detection, even more so than that of the possessed woman from the island. Legion stepped closer to the glass.
"He's trying to stall,"
Horseman said into my comlink. "You helped Istavis eliminate his competition. Why does he have you locked away?" "Whoever said we were locked away?" "We?" I asked. Legion only smiled and looked behind me. I turned and saw 2 other Roman soldiers emerging from the darkness behind me. They didn't look like him though. They both looked like normal people almost, only very scarred, with black eyes and graying skin. "Behold, the survivors of the 9th, their souls and bodies given to the master of my realm." I readied myself for a fight. The 2 men had their shields raised. Their swords ignited, but they weren't exactly blue. They were almost purple, almost like they had been corrupted. They both charged at me, faster than I'd expected. I was barely able to parry their sword strikes and found myself on the defensive. This didn't last long, as I pulled my pistol from my hip while trying to block and dodge their swords. "What are these things?" I asked as I managed to squeeze off a round into one of their eyeballs. He screamed in pain as he backed off a few steps, leaving me one-on-one with the other. It charged at me and tried to slash. He was fast. I was slightly faster, evading the strike and delivering a thrust of my own. One found its way into the soldier's throat.
"Survivors of the 9th Roman Legion, ones who must have surrendered at the river Styx. The Legion must have had Istavis using blood magic to summon them here."
"From where?" I asked.
"From hell."
The now one-eyed soldier glared at me for a moment. I watched in horror as his eye suddenly started to heal on its own.
"You have to use your sword,"
Horseman said. "I see that," I replied. I could hear Legion cackle from his cage. The remaining soldier charged me, throwing a few strikes with his sword. Our blades met a few times, sending sparks flying across the room. This one was far more skilled than his counterpart. He seemed to be able to match my sword strikes. I still had my pistol though. He was being a bit more cautious now, keeping his shield over his eyes when I raised it. That was his mistake to make. I raised my pistol at his face and fired. He blocked the bullets with his shield. So, I went low, sliding past him and slashing his leg off. The Roman fell to the ground, and before he could comprehend what had happened, I cut his head off. "Welcome to the future," I said as I turned back to Legion. The demon in the box smiled at me. "Oh my boy, you come exactly as advertised," he purred. I readied my sword. I wanted to cut this fucker to pieces now. I stepped towards the cage, only for Legion to suddenly vanish. I stopped dead in my tracks. "What was that?" I asked.
He went back to hell. It looks like the box that he was in was a summoning box. It's a long story, but he wouldn't be able to exist in our world without it.
I looked down at the 2 dead Roman soldiers. They were like me, weren't they?
At one point in time. The 9th is a different story for another day. Most are Revenants now. The survivors were all tortured until they became loyal slaves of Abaddon and his generals, Legion being one of them. Estevis must have made some friends before Victor brought him back.
I thought demons couldn't exist in our world. I get how Legion did it, but what about the soldiers?
They were born on Earth. They could be summoned with a blood sacrifice.
Do you think there are more? I asked.
No, not if Legion left.
With that, I started making my way back upstairs. Horseman had found the warden. He was heading into a storage area for most of the prisoners' personal belongings. The only problem? Opilia and her team were in the same storage area. I ran hard, cloaking my suit as I did so. I also hit the EMP button on my suit. All the lights around me shut off, bathing the hallway in blackness. My HUD switched to night vision. I walked into the storage room to find the warden and several guards with weapons aimed at Opilia and her team. But everyone seemed confused at the sudden power outage. I didn't waste any time. I ignited my sword behind the warden, then went to my bloody work. Some guards got shots off, but it didn't matter. When the lights came back on, I was standing there with my sword in one hand and the warden cowering at my feet. I'd hit him a few times and stolen his phone in the darkness. I looked up at Opilia and her team. They all stood there dumbstruck. "Is that a fucking Power Ranger?" asked Miguel. "Who are you?" Opilia asked. It was just like her to be suspicious of someone who just saved her. She was every bit as beautiful as I remembered. "You guys need to move. Shaw will be here any second. I've got work to do." I turned to walk out, my eyes catching a man I had not recognized with Ophilia's group. A scraggly-looking man who honestly almost looked like Estevis. The man was staring daggers into the warden. He gripped a fire axe tightly. I walked out of the room. I could hear as the warden begged the man for his life. I could hear Ophilia's footsteps following me. I'd recognize the toot anywhere. My heart rate escalated a bit. Then, I was suddenly teleported. I stood on the rooftop of the prison. A few minutes had passed, and I had watched Opilia, her teams, and the unnamed prisoner get into an osprey where Shaw had been waiting. I exhaled a sigh of relief. I heard the footsteps behind me. "I gave you orders not to make contact," Horseman said. "They were cornered. Relax. They don't know who I am." "They can't know. Shaw needs plausible deniability. You're a weapon." I took a deep breath as I pulled my helmet off and turned to him. I could see the frustration on his face. "I still don't like it," I said. He considered this for a second before speaking. "It doesn't matter what you like. All that matters is that we stop Gideon. And trust me, kid, you'll understand." I chuckled. It's been a while since anyone called me kid. The horseman snapped his fingers as police sirens could be heard in the distance. We found ourselves on a beach. My eyes drifted to the full moon overhead. "I've got the coordinates for a place called Deadfall. You're right about Carlos Esteves. He's been going there once a week since he's come back, which means their Omega Serum isn't complete." The horseman took another deep breath. "Unfortunately, I fear it's not the Omega Serum that needs to be destroyed. I finally finished sorting through the files you got from Gideon Tower." "And?" I asked. "The girl is the key, but we knew that already. They need her blood. If we were smart about this, we'd kill her and burn the body. I thought about this for a second, my mind having flashbacks to Chad shooting the girl in Amsterdam. Grace didn't deserve any of this. I had been partially responsible for Chad's mistake. I'd covered up for Chad. I remembered what Horseman said earlier. I was a weapon. But even so, that's not a line I'm willing to cross, I said. The Horseman smirked. Good. It got quiet on the beach for a moment. I watched the moonlit waves dance on the beach. I'm sending you to Deadfall. Once you're there, I want you to sink it to the bottom of the ocean. I took a deep breath as I put my mask back on. Yes, sir. I am Nemesis. The thought persisted in my head constantly. I am a weapon. I am a force. I exist to save the world. Or did I exist to serve the Horseman of Death? I was his instrument, his herald, his bitch? No, that wasn't right. He'd given me a second chance. But was it worth it? I'd killed so many people. I'd done so much harm. Guilt wasn't something I was accustomed to. Not until after I died anyway. We spent 2 days prepping for our operation into Deadfall. Based on files from Gideon Tower, we knew the place was warded to hell. Teleporting there would be impossible. We knew we'd have to come in by boat, which was problematic enough as it is, with the human guards patrolling the ground. Deadfall itself was an oil rig somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico, one that had been converted into a massive aquatic lab for Gideon and their scientific community. They'd also done heaps of research and testing for Lazarus, which was why Horseman wanted it sunk. Approaching on boat guaranteed that we'd be spotted. We could have tried a smaller boat, but that would only get us caught by the Revenant Titanoboa that patrolled the waters near it. During the time we'd been planning, I'd been keeping track of what Opilia and her team had been up to. They'd managed to attack the ship Estevez was using to link up to get a supplement of great value Omega Serum to keep himself sane. They'd also managed to capture the man himself and locate Chad, who just happened to be on Deadfall. I'd have to go and save his ass too. There was one point while we were prepping that a thought occurred to me. Victor's an angel, right? I asked. He was a general in Heaven's armies. His name isn't actually Victor. It's unpronounceable in any human language. He just chose Victor because he liked the way it sounded, the Horseman said as he stood ahead of me. I thought angels were supposed to be the good guys, I said. The Horseman inhaled deeply. I'm gonna share with you a memory, he said right before touching my forehead. I was suddenly amongst a crowd of people. The air was brisk and smelled of burning meat. I could tell by what the people were wearing that they were peasants in some medieval European country. We were in a courtyard of some sort. There was a stage ahead of us where a beefy man with a massive double-sided axe stood next to a kneeling woman. Ahead of them was a skinny, frail-looking man draped in red robes, reading from a scroll. This woman has been found guilty of witchcraft by our most high priest and is therefore sentenced to death by beheading. The crowd had found themselves in a frenzy. They booed and jeered. Some even threw rotten fruits at the girl. The woman didn't waver though. She seemed resigned to her fate. Her blonde hair was tattered in blood. Her eye was blackened. She'd clearly put up a fight before her capture. The robed man turned back to her with a sneer. "Have you any last words?" he asked. The girl smirked. "My fate is sealed. My soul will be in heaven before this day ends. Yours won't." The man knelt down to her, and despite the shouts of the crowd, I could hear him whisper, "Your friends have abandoned you. You speak of a father who can't intervene. Your idle threats mean nothing to me. Then why do you look scared? She asked with a smile. The man stood up and motioned for the executioner to begin his work. He took a step forward and raised his axe. Then, in one swipe, he brought the blade whistling down, slicing the woman's head off in one clean swing. The hit bounced off the stage and into the crowd, which parted as it rolled, only coming to a stop when it hit my foot. A bright light suddenly flashed across the sky, a blinding white light accompanied by a very agonized scream. A being slammed down hard into the wooden stage, shattering it into pieces. Splinters flew through the air along with a cloud of dust. The impact sent a shockwave that sent the crowd around me flying. I stood there though, watched as the figure, a man in a white cloak, approached the head, dropping to a knee when he got to it. Victor cradled the girl's head in his arms for a moment. "No," he sobbed. "How could they?" I knelt down before him, getting eye level. His tears fell onto the girl's lifeless head. "Humans are strange." I started to speak, but the horseman's voice came out. "They use God to justify their own malicious acts. They wonder why he hasn't come back since the crucifixion. They're not all evil though." Victor's eyes met mine. "Why didn't you help her?" he asked. "You know why." Victor's face morphed into one of disgust. "You're supposed to protect humanity from world-ending threats, not power-hungry bishops," I replied. "He killed my daughter," Victor shouted as he shot to his feet. "And the Hell Hunters will stop him." "Victor, you're emotionally unstable right now. You're not thinking straight," Horseman said. "Not thinking straight?" "No, I'm thinking straighter than ever before," he said, before suddenly vanishing. The next thing I knew, I was standing in the plane again. The horseman was sitting down at his computer. "His daughter," I said softly, "beheaded for being a witch, on the orders of a bishop that was ironically under the influence of the Necronomicon at the time. We hadn't been able to prove that one yet though." "Wouldn't he have gone to see her in heaven?" I asked. "Yeah, but it wasn't so much as the loss of her as the snuffing out of her life. She was half human, half angel, a Nephilim. Her death was unnecessary in the cosmic scale, and we all knew it, which is why we couldn't intervene. Victor showing up at the end would have gotten him locked away had the Hell Hunters not been able to prove the bishop had been tainted." "Hell Hunters?" I asked. "Long story," said Horseman. "Victor doesn't want to destroy humanity himself. That would be too easy. It would also be suicide on his part. Victor's more out to prove a point. He doesn't think humanity can be trusted with its own fate. He wants this weapon, Lazarus. He wants to give it to people who will use it. He wants humanity to prove to heaven that they're unworthy of the worlds they'd been given." "So, what's the plan?" I asked as I watched the horseman type away on his computer. "I'm working on it," he said. I was admittedly irritated. My friend was stuck in Victor's custody and probably being used in some kind of fucked up experiment. "We could airdrop you in," Horseman said. "Halo jump, you mean?" I asked. He shrugged. "A guy parachuting in would garner some attention," I replied. "Whoever said anything about parachuting in?" the horseman asked with a smirk. "We did a little more research, looking over personal files and whatnot. Basic intelligence gathering. We didn't find anything major, other than 2 files, one on an assassin known as Anthony the Crow Gunk, who had been sent to beef up security. Apparently the man had a grudge against me in particular after I messed up his security team up at Gideon Tower. The other was a man I'd met before, Colonel Ivan Willis, or, as he was known in intelligence circles, Matt Ivan. I met Ivan initially in Grozny. He was the second in command of Gideon's security forces. He was formerly a member of the US Navy SEALs before a friendly fire incident killed him. Enter Victor and Gideon. and I'm sure you can guess the rest. As I said, I met the guy in Grasny. He was the guy Jamie had sold us out to, the one whose mercenaries showed up and killed one of my agents before burning down the safe house down that Chad was inside of. He was on my shit list. He wouldn't be for very much longer. I stood at the edge of the plane's off-ramp, watching the sea way down below me. The horseman stood to my left with his hands in his pockets. I was nervous. I'd done a few halo jumps in the past, but never without a parachute. You sure the suit can handle this? I asked. The horseman smirked.
Mostly,
he said. I took a deep breath as I read it myself. This was stupid, jumping out of a fully functional plane.
Remember your assignment. Get in, initiate a self-destruct sequence, get your friend, then leave. Got it?
He asked. I nodded as I took a step off the ramp. That fall was just a speck in the blue ocean below me. I fell, moving faster and faster every second, the speck getting larger and larger. Until finally, I slammed into the facility roof. It hurt. When I say it hurt, I meant it hurt like a motherfucker. But the suit held fast. I'd never thought I'd be so happy to have fallen into concrete and steel. I rolled to my feet and raised my rifle.
You know you could have landed on your feet, right?
The horseman's voice said over comms. Fuck you, I said. I could hear the horseman chuckle. That was when I heard a voice. The sound came from up here, it said. I cloaked and started to step backward as a guard used the ladder to climb up onto the roof. He walked over to the crater I'd left and looked down at it. Did we get hit by a meteor? He asked. Another guard walked up behind him. It wasn't a meteor, you idiot. What else would leave a crater like this? He asked. It was probably falling debris from a plane. A meteor would have sank the place. When did you become a meteor expert? Asked the first guard. I exhaled as I turned and walked off from the two men arguing. That was when the call came through my comlink.
Hey Trent, the CIA are en route to extract Chad. Do me a favor and clear off the helipad so they can land without being shot at.
That fall was a big place, but not big enough to where I couldn't see the helipad on the other side of the facility. I calmly approached the two other guards that were chatting on the helipad. You ever think they were just masked men that were sent to places to be cannon fodder for the main characters to tear through like paper mache? One asked. The other turned and looked at him with his head cocked to the side. Have you been doing LSD again? It got quiet for a second. Yeah, he replied. Damn it, Kruger, I told you. I stabbed one in the back and shot the other in the side of the head before tossing the bodies down into the rough ocean below. Two less problems to deal with. Now I had to find a way inside. I did so through an air vent, which was large enough to get through. The files said that the facility's self-destruct sequence could be started from a control console in one of the lower levels. I made my way to that level by shimmying through several air vents, eventually popping out in the same room. I had already been cloaked. I approached the computer, my suit doing its good work. I was in almost instantly. I had access to everything on site, including security feeds. I flipped the self-destruct sequence. The moment I did, all hell broke loose. Alarms blared. It was a timing matter now. The sequence would take 10 minutes to work, which meant I had 5 to go and grab Chad and get him to his team up top. I started to make my way out of the room when a man in a lab coat came barging through the doorway. How the hell? He seemed confused as he walked up to the console and started typing numbers. I groaned under my breath as I lifted my pistol and shot him in the back of the head. His body fell to the floor. Then I adjusted my aim and fired into the console. I walked to the doorway and looked down at it. That was when I noticed the fingerprint scanner next to the doorway. I groaned again as I turned to the body. To my credit, it took me maybe 4 minutes to find Chad through a maze of whited out hallways and labs. I killed a few more guards along the way. Chad was standing there, bug-eyed, as a mercenary had a gun aimed at him. I decloaked right away behind the mercenary. Chad's eyes shot to me. The mercenary followed his gaze, turning around to see me. "You a Star Wars fan?" I asked as I ignited my sword. I didn't give him a second to answer before I lopped his head from his shoulders. His body fell, leaving Chad standing there staring at me with a mortified expression. I'm 100% a Star Wars fan," he said with his hands up. "Let's go, Mad Dog," I said as I turned and started walking down the hallway. He followed me until we made it to a steel doorway with a fingerprint lock. "How are we going to get through that?" he asked. I pulled the Laptac's severed finger from one of the magazine pouches on my belt and placed it on the lock. "That's fucking disgusting," he said. The door opened, revealing a set of stairs. "The exit should be this way. Your team is..." I was interrupted by a loud crack. Something hit the back of my head hard. My suit held. I turned to see who my assailant was, only to find a man clad in black tactical gear who wore a black boonie hat and his face was covered by high-tech looking goggles and a black mask. He had 2 massive revolvers aimed at me. "Get upstairs," I ordered Chad as I started walking away towards the man. To give the crow some credit, he fired his pistols faster than anyone I'd ever seen, but every round bounced off my armor. It took maybe 3 steps to close the distance. I lopped one of his arms off before kicking him in the center of his chest. The man went sailing into the nearest wall. He was out cold. "How much time do I have left?" I asked.
3 minutes.
"How am I supposed to?" I was interrupted by something blasting through the wall ahead of me. I stopped dead in my tracks as I stared into the black eyes of a zombified-looking snake. "That's a big-ass snake," I said as the thing came flying down the hallway at me. The snake looked as one would expect a massive black python to look like, only its body must have been as thick as a large tree stump. Its head was the size of a shopping cart and missing skin on one side of his face. I turned and began to run the other way, but it caught up to me faster than I'd been ready for, coiling its body around me before clenching down on me with its massive jaws. It all happened so fast. The next thing I knew, it had already swallowed me. I still had my sword, but I couldn't lift my arm high enough to use it. The creature itself was already dead, so it didn't feel any pain when I ignited the weapon. So I went with my next best option. I let go of the sword and reached for a grenade on my belt. The inside of the creature smelled like rotten and decayed fish. It honestly made me want to gag. It looked even worse, especially through my hood. It took a lot of effort to get my thumb around the pin of a grenade, but I did. Then I pulled it. The explosion sent me flying out of one of the snake's sides and into a wall. I struggled to get to my feet, only to find the snake was face to face with me, now missing a good portion of its throat. I reached out my hand and called my sword back just as it sneered back to strike. Call it skill, luck, whatever you want, but I shoved the sword through the top of the beast's mouth and into its brain. The beast fell to the floor. I stood there for a second, trying to comprehend. "How did that thing find me?" I asked.
"You got less than 2 minutes before this place goes up. Get outside,"
Horseman said into our comlink. "Did Chad make it?" I asked.
"He'll be fine."
I did as told, sprinting down the winding hallways and up the stairs just in time to come across Mad Ivan himself as he bashed in a Revenant's head with his pistol. There was a large gaping hole in the side of his neck, almost like he'd been bitten by something or someone. He exhaled as he got to his feet. He turned and glanced at me over his black sunglasses. His bald head and graying beard were covered in specks of blood and brain matter. He smiled widely. You're the one who's been raiding our facilities," he said as he got to his feet. I looked down at the body right below him. He seemed to follow my gaze. "Oh, that's Janet. She had an accident, got herself infected with a test batch and died." I raised my pistol at him. He didn't really react to this. He only smiled at me. I could feel my heart rate escalating as my brain played the images of this man, his laugh as Jamie unloaded his pistol into my chest. I'd been shot in the initial exchange with his men, finding myself sitting up against the CIA battle van, a wound in my chest, blood leaking from my mouth. When a black SUV rolled up, I wasn't going to sit there. Chad was in cover and in the barn behind me. We'd been separated during the exchange. I knew exactly who they were. Gideon security forces. My only real question was, how had they tracked us? Matt Ivan himself stepped out of the SUV, wearing the exact same smile that he was wearing now. "Damn, kid, you don't look so good." That was what he said to me, right before Jamie showed himself. And well, you all know what happened next. There was a bit more conversing, of course, but you get the gist. I got shot. I didn't want to waste a moment. Matt Ivan stood across from me, his eyes bloodshot and his wound beginning to bubble. He had been infected with the Revenant pathogen, but he hadn't died yet. I kept my pistol aimed at him. "Who are you anyway?" Ivan asked. "Damn, kid, you don't look so good," I said almost mockingly. Ivan's eyes widened in realization. His smile seemed to grow. "I remember you." "Good," I said as I aimed my pistol and fired a round straight into his skull.
"Nemesis, you have 20 seconds.
Horseman said into my comms. I didn't even get a chance to take in the comment. I took off in a full sprint toward the surface whilst trying to pull my helmet back on. I barely made it outside when a rip blew, the explosion sending me sailing into the ocean. I hit the water hard. Next thing I knew, I was teleported into the armory, my suit soaking wet and my whole body hurting from the explosion in the ocean. I lay there for a minute. The horseman stood over me with his hands on his hips. "You okay?" he asked. I held up a finger before looking up at him. I yanked my helmet off and coughed hard. "Are you in pain?" "I thought this suit was supposed to be indestructible," I said. "It is, but you, my friend, are not." I groaned as I sat up. The horseman helped me to my feet. "I've got some security footage to show you, whenever you're ready," he said. As it turned out, he had footage of Chad escaping. Opilia had come on a helicopter and pulled him out, which was honestly a relief. But that wasn't what Horseman wanted me to see. What he wanted to show me was the footage of Jamie, Ivan and Chad standing in the lab. Well, Chad wasn't exactly standing, more like cuffed and leaning against the wall. They were looking at a vat of a familiar-looking crimson liquid. I couldn't hear the audio, but I audibly gasped when Ivan very suddenly pulled his revolver and shot Jamie in the chest with it. Jamie fell down dead. Then Ivan and Chad exited the room, while several men in lab coats recovered the body. The footage followed them as they opened the vat and stuffed Jamie's body inside. A few hours later, in the footage, a familiar-looking man came into the room with several mercenaries behind him. It wasn't Ivan. It wasn't the Crow. It was Victor Marks himself, clad in his white suit and maroon tie. The mercenaries took the vat on his orders. I wasn't sure where to. At least, not until Horseman spoke up. When Jamie wakes up, what use do you think Victor would have for him? It didn't take long for me to figure out the answer to that. The location of the CIA safe houses in the Paris area, I said sternly. Horseman nodded. "How long do we have?" I asked. "I'm not sure, but I know that Shaw is sending Ophelia's team to go and recover the stones." "But you're not sure how long they'll take to mobilize, so you need me to go and provide protection for them." "Look at the brain on you, Mr. Grayson." "Wouldn't that compromise my identity?" I asked. "Keep your mask on, and it won't be a problem." I shrugged. "You said their Omega serum was incomplete, right? Is there a chance it doesn't work?" Horseman took a deep breath. "The files from that file system indicate that the batch they used on Jamie is as close to pure as they can get. Victor's own blood played a hand in that." "Fuck," I said. I didn't get a real chance to rest, as I had to re-prep and be deployed to Paris. I was teleported to an alleyway that was maybe 200 yards away from the entrance to the safe house, which itself was technically in the basement of a nearby warehouse with a secret tunnel exit that led to a nearby field. I made my way through the alleyway, finding myself at the entrance to the warehouse basement. My HUD went to work, scanning the entrance. It had some kind of X-ray vision that enabled me to see through the door and into the entrance, where David Stone sat in a chair with a shotgun in his lap. I smirked as my soot began dialing the number on the phone I'd given him. He looked surprised as he pulled it from his jacket and put it to his ear.
Hello?
He asked. I'm coming in. Don't shoot me on accident, I said. I opened the door and came down the ladder that led straight down into the entrance, only to find David and Grace waiting at the bottom for me. I thought Shaw was sending a team, David asked. The team is too far out and the safe house is compromised. You are stuck with me until they get here, I said as I walked past them and into one of the bedroom areas. The safe house itself was set up like a 2-bedroom apartment, only it was underground and had to be accessed by either the ladder at the entrance or the tunnel system in the back. Have you accessed the tunnel system yet? I asked, already knowing the answer. Tunnel system? Asked David. I exited the master bedroom and walked into the bathroom, where I found a captured mercenary tied up in the shower. The bathroom floor was also slick with water. It looked like they were keeping the man as uncomfortable as possible. It was working too, as the man looked miserable. I looked down at all the water. You guys know the CIA has to pay the water bill for this place, right? If the CIA is paying, then I don't care, David said. That's actually pretty funny, I said. I reached over the man and pulled the shower head down. As I did so, the back wall of the shower suddenly came up, revealing a dark, rocky tunnel that led to another exit. Taro laughed when I did this. Stay here, I said. I'll go make sure the tunnels are clear. I walked into the darkened tunnel, my HUD displaying its night vision mode. I could see all. I also had gotten a notification as soon as I entered the entrance to the safe house that the tunnels had been breached, which was why I went in alone. It took me a minute to reach the culprits, a team of Gideon security forces soldiers, all of which had night vision. But that didn't help them as much, as I still had my cloaking ability. I cut them down before they knew I was there. That was when I got the notification that the other door had been breached. I turned to start running back down the tunnels when a rope lowered from the entrance behind me. I turned to see another squad of mercenaries fast rope inside. Shit, I grumbled. I cut these mercenaries down as fast as I could. By the time I was yanking my sword from the last one, the tunnel had suddenly began shaking. My eyes widened as I realized what had happened. I turned and took off in a full sprint back towards the safe house, only to come to a sliding stop when I found Grace. She was staring at the rubble with a horrified expression on her face. I could hear her sob. The priest was trying his best to calm her down, hugging her closely. I knew what had happened. David had planted explosives in the safe house as a contingency. I was kicking myself that I couldn't get back in time. Grace? We need to go, the priest, Father Raphael said softly. My heart ached for the girl. I wanted to give her a minute to get her head on, but we quite frankly didn't have time. I did the only thing I could think of at the moment. I took off my helmet and put my hand on her shoulder. Grace, I started softly. Listen to me. We need to get out of here, or it would have all been for nothing. Okay? Grace sobbed a bit more. We all stood there for a second, her sobs being the only thing we could hear in the tunnel. That was until there were suddenly footsteps behind me. I was about to raise my weapon and turn. Then I realized something. I knew those footsteps. My eyes widened as my heart began to race. Trent? Her voice asked. I turned to her slowly. I could see the mixture of elation, confusion, and anger on her face. I wanted to run to her. I wanted to hold her, to kiss her. But I had a job to do. Agent Wild, you need to get this young lady to safety, I said sternly. Opilia had seen me use that tone before. I knew she wanted to talk more, but she bit her tongue. She knew what I was thinking. The mission. Then maybe we could have an explanation. Okay, she said. I pulled my helmet back on.
What have you done?
Horseman's voice asked into my mask. My audio had been muted to everyone around me. I know what it's like to lose a parent. I didn't think.
You compromised everything.
Horseman said aggressively, before taking a deep breath.
But given the circumstances, I understand. Go with them. Ensure the girls stay safe.
Yes, sir. About an hour later, we were on an airstrip. Shaw himself waited for us at the top of a ramp connected to the back of a C-17. I didn't know how to feel when I saw him. He seemed genuinely happy to see me though, even if his face didn't show it. Raphael and I guided Grace up the ramp. "Trent?" Shaw greeted as we walked past him. I could hear the familiar footsteps storming up behind me. I couldn't help but crack a smile under my mask. "Better watch out," I replied. I got a look just over my shoulder as Opilia tagged Shaw in his face. His glasses went sailing onto the ramp. "You son of a bitch! How could you?" she demanded, Chad now close behind her. "Opilia? Not now," Chad said softly. Shaw wiped his now bloody lip. Opilia had another swing ready to go, but she lowered her fist and walked past him, leaving Shaw and Chad standing there. "I'll explain when we get to the Reagan." "You fucking better," Chad said. We used a specially made blanket to mask Grace from the satellite. I spent most of the flight looking at the floor, still mentally kicking myself that I couldn't get back fast enough to pull David out. I even had my HUD pull the security footage so I could see what had happened. It went something like this. The camera in the entranceway caught the steel entrance door fly into the entranceway from the top of the ladder. A smoke grenade landed shortly after. I could hear David's voice. "Shit," he called out. Cut to the bedroom. David is shutting a sliding steel door. He's looking at Raphael, who is the only one in there with him. Grace is in the bathroom with the prisoner. We will get to that later. The steel doorway is suddenly dented inward. David has a shocked expression. He looks at Raphael.
"Get Grace to the tunnels." "What will you do?"
Raphael asks.
"I'll catch up."
Raphael goes into the bathroom to get Grace. The steel door is violently kicked in. There's a silhouette in the doorframe amongst the smoke.
"Mr. Stone,"
it says sinisterly. David doesn't hesitate as he raises his double barrel and fires. The silhouette flies into the room faster than a human eye can track, knocking the shotgun from David's hands. It's a vampire, a brutal one at that. David deploys a silver sleeve blade and tries to stab it, but it catches him by his wrist with one hand while shoving a dagger into his shoulder with the other.
"You've gotten slow, old man."
The vampire sneers before tossing David into a nearby wall. David gets to his feet, all the while coughing up blood, the vampire cockily walking towards him. This was around the time the horseman's voice broke in. "That's Jackson Helsing. Or Jackson Tippis now. He took his wife's last name." "Tippis?" I almost laughed.
David. I must say, I admire your fight. Always have. You could have made a fantastic member of the Black Guard had Anna chosen to turn you. But she didn't. Instead, you two conceived your abomination,"
Jackson said. David tries to swing his blade at him again, but Jackson ducked under it and shoved his dagger into David's chest. I could feel my heart rate escalate. Jackson was face to face with David, who was trying to say something as the blood started leaking into his lungs.
"Last words?"
Jackson asked.
She's not an abomination. She's fucking perfect,"
David said as he lifted one of his hands, revealing a switch that also just happened to be a detonator. The screen went black, leaving me inside my dark helmet. The whole exchange had lasted less than a minute. If I'd been faster, I could have saved them. I'd already killed a few vampires. "You did your job, Trent. She's safe," Horseman said. I took a deep breath, my helmet going back to where I could see in front of me, where a pair of Desert 10 size 14 combat boots stood in front of me. I looked up at Chad, who was staring down at me. I took a deep breath. I suppose you want answers? Omega? He asked. Kind of. Not the one Estevis got though. Mine was pure. Chad took a deep breath. Why didn't you let us know you were alive? You could have called. Left a note. Something. It wasn't allowed. Bullshit. We stared at each other for a second. I took a deep breath. Now wasn't the time for arguing. Chad, you've got no idea the forces that are at play right now. One's powerful enough to bring the dead back to life. I saw your fucking body, dude. It's more than just that. You saw Lazarus in action at that fall. The final product will be much worse. Lazarus? Asked Raphael. I turned to him. It's what they need Grace for. Her blood is the key to the final mutation. It's a bioweapon, one built to cause terror. It got quiet again. I could feel my eyes drifting to Opilia. She was staring into nothing, just like I had been. It made my heart ache even worse. She was hurting, and there was nothing I could do. I felt helpless, more helpless than I'd ever felt before I was murdered. The old Trent would have known what to say to her. I think Chad seemingly noticed my staring. Are you going to talk to her? She's pretty shaken up. Eventually, yes, but not right now. Trent. Trent is dead, I said. I'm all that's left. I said more to myself than anything. I'm not sure I realized I'd said it out loud. The USS Reagan was built with the intention of having those who see it getting it confused with the USS Ronald Reagan. It was a completely classified project. It was the most advanced supercarrier in the world. The place was practically a floating city. It had even its own hospital. It was twice as large as the Ronald Reagan. It could hold almost double the aircraft. It also had an assortment of firepower that I won't get into now. Our team had operated out of that ship for 2 years. We'd gotten to know the crew quite well. We even had a CIA-sanctioned control room in one of the lower decks. It was one of those rooms that was very Hollywood-esque, with the rows of people and computers and a massive screen on one wall. We were in this control room when the fireworks started. Opilia had unloaded on Shaw verbally. I'd be lying if I said I didn't miss her spunk. Plausible deniability? That's horseshit and you know it, she barked. Agent Wild, calm yourself, he retorted. Calm herself? You hid Trent being alive from her for a month, and all you have to say is, calm yourself? Shaw took a deep breath. Like I said, we needed someone who could go after Gideon that wasn't on our team. If Jones finds out that we orchestrated the robbery in Grozny, he'd shut us down. The room got quiet. We all knew Shaw was right, of course. It didn't make Opilia and Chad feel any better though. They have their hooks in everyone. The further we kept this from you guys, the better. This is Gideon. It's not chasing a militia with a bioweapon, and it's not the Estevis cartel. Nemesis enabled us to play actual offense. I was leaning on the doorframe watching the argument, knowing full well that Opilia wasn't done yet. You still could have told us he was alive, she growled. That was when Horseman suddenly appeared in between them. Enough, he said in a slightly raised voice that made the whole room go silent. Except for an even more annoyed Opilia. Who the hell are you? She demanded. I straightened myself up. I was now standing next to Shaw and behind the Horseman. I am the first Horseman. The Horseman of Death. I am the one who brought Trent back from the dead. Opilia turned and looked at Chad. Chad shrugged. Right, Chad said. The Horseman looked around. This whole thing has been a game played by forces beyond your understanding. It's complicated and deadly to say the least. Victor Marks has to be stopped. If not, the world will burn. We've currently got the advantage. We have the girl. But make no mistakes, Victor will respond. This seemed to quiet the room. I could see Opilia staring at me. I could see the want in her eyes. But there wasn't anything I could do. Not until the job was done. The Horseman turned to me. "A word," he said before snapping his fingers. We were teleported to the top deck of the ship. The sun was rising in the distance. The ship rocked gently. I took a deep breath. "What now?" I asked. As if answering my question, Raziel, one of the 3 angels from earlier, appeared before me. "Abel?" he greeted as he looked at the horseman. "Raziel?" he replied. "The Lightbender Temple harboring Hector Morales is under attack." "Unsurprising," the horseman replied. "I have Rain gathering the survivors. Her son is among them." "Her son?" asked Horseman. "Yes, he was the Lightbender that protected Hector Morales during his assassination attempt. It would seem that Morales raised him, which is strange to say the least. As a Nephilim, his powers should have activated when he was 16, but they didn't, not until one of the temple's warriors tried to kill him." "Why?" asked Horseman. "From what the Grandmaster told us, and what we can piece together, Rain's son killed a Lightbender called Simon after he robbed Morales. Aisha was sent to investigate and enact justice, but she just happened to show up at the same time as a Gideon assassin, a rogue god called Raiden. I'm sure you can guess the rest. The Grandmaster was more concerned about a rogue god than Rain's son. They took the son and Morales into their protection. They were at Gideon Tower looking for answers when Nemesis encountered them, but we knew that already. I didn't realize the assassin was a rogue god," Horseman said. Raziel nodded. "We didn't know the exact details until Grandmaster Nigel debriefed us, only that he had a Lightbender on his security detail. Send the survivors here. We can interrogate them, provide medical aid, then maybe they can assist us in the coming battle." Raziel nodded and then disappeared. Horseman turned to me. I was honestly worried that he was about to tear into me for getting my cover blown. "You think the last month has been hard. The battle's just beginning," he said. "Well, it wasn't ever supposed to be easy, was it?" I asked. The horseman just smirked at me. "If all goes well, you may get a happy ending out of this. You're not a bad person, Trent." I sighed. "I'm whatever I need to be." He took a deep breath. "Did he call you Abel?" I asked. The horseman laughed. Yeah, he did." "No wonder you just go by Horseman." The horseman ignored this as he looked out at the ocean. The sun was semi-up at this point. He seemed to admire it, almost like he thought it was peaceful. I, on the other hand, was still ready for my nap, that I knew wasn't coming anytime soon. I've been around since the dawn of man. I've seen species go extinct and empires rise and fall. I've seen floods and volcanoes wipe out whole civilizations. Diseases melt the flesh of millions and wars destroy even more. But humanity always gets back up from the ashes. That's what I love about them. Their perseverance. The sun always comes up and finds them waiting for its warmth. I dread the day the sun comes up to find the life extinguished. I took a deep breath as I considered the words. "Honestly, sir, I'm still sore from that fucking snake." He eyed me before vanishing. That was when they appeared. The female Lightbender from earlier, whose name was Aisha. A man I recognized as Hector Morales. The male Lightbender, Rashette. A wounded old Lightbender who I guess was Grandmaster Nigel. And then the last one, the younger man that made my heart go crazy with an angelic energy detection. He had a sword strapped to his back, a sword with a dragon on the hilt. He was tall and lean. I guessed that he was Rain's child. The whole group looked battered and torn. Nigel looked like he was about to die. Rashette was barely able to hold him up. My heart identified that his ribs were broken on one side and that his lung was collapsed. My eyes locked on Aisha. "So glad you could join us." We got Nigel to the medical area. I got the story from a now much friendlier Aisha that Gideon security forces had come upon their temple in the dead of night. that they'd killed most of the members inside. Nigel had been attacked by Raiden himself. Raiden being the Japanese god of thunder, and Nigel being the Grandmaster of the temple. Their fight shouldn't have been as one-sided as it was. Nigel would have been dead if not for the intervention of Keith, Rain's son. Why an angel of the Lord named her child Keith, you ask? Who knows? Poor kid. I did a background check on Keith. Call me crazy, but something was strange about him. What I learned was that he joined the Marines out of high school, only to be kicked out for stabbing a superior officer in the chest with a pen. Before the Marines, Hector Morales has been his legal guardian after Keith's father, a Cuban immigrant whose first name was unavailable, but his last name was Gonzalez, went missing. It was assumed that it was because of a plane crash, but who really knows? As for Keith, he did some time in a military prison and was dishonorably discharged. This was around the same time that Hector's BioWare company had started making ground. Keith was brought in by his pseudo-father as private security. From there, the record isn't exactly squeaky clean. Keith seems to have been a suspect in several missing person and murder cases, mostly in New York City. If I were to guess, I'd say he was doing hits on the side. He was never formally charged, of course. A few hours later, I found myself standing in the control room, Opilia, Shaw and Chat standing across from me. We all knew we currently held the advantage with Grace being on the ship. We all knew Victor would do something in response. We didn't know what. Not yet. But maybe, just maybe, we could go on the offensive. From how I see it, you've got two options. Play keep away with the girl, or try and figure out Gideon's next move. I'd be willing to bet they're going to try and force our hand. I said, "Can you take the mask off? It's hard to understand you with it on." Opilia asked. I knew what she was doing. She wanted to see my face. She knew if she did, that I wouldn't be able to hide behind my mask. I took a deep breath. "No, it's not. But, whatever," I said as I pulled the helmet off. "What's the call?" I asked. Hector Morales said that they took his daughter. He's on our boat. I don't know about you, but that sounds like leverage to me. We need to get her back. I don't want him doing something stupid on my ship," Shaw said. "I'd be more worried about Esteves. The dude may be locked up, but he does have a super soldier serum in him," replied Chat. Shaw nodded. "I'll double the guard in the brig. We need to know all the places Gideon security takes their high-value prisoners, especially if we're going after Hector's daughter," I said, thinking that this would have been easier if we could get back on Gideon's mainframe. A voice broke me out of my trance. "I know someone who may be able to help." We all turned to see Grace standing at the doorway. She looked sullen, but more so angry. Angry that her father was taken from her. I could tell what she was thinking. She wanted payback. "Who?" asked Shaw. "Our prisoner, Terrell. I let him go. Gideon kills their own men when they're compromised." "Who's Terrell?" My suit records everything. As soon as I heard the name, his image appeared on my HUD. A holographic image of Terrell locked up in the shower appeared right above my wrist. I watched as Chat's face lit up like a Christmas tree. "No fucking way," Chat said. "What?" I asked, already thinking I knew the answer. "That is, or was Rachel's handler. He's MI6. I guess I better do another information dump." Early on in Chat's career with the CIA, Chat met a redhead girl at a bar in San Diego. From how he tells the story, she asked him for his number, and a year later, they were married. She didn't know he was in the CIA until they tied the knot. Then a few weeks later, we're on a mission in Mogadishu, where we're supposed to meet an MI6 liaison. Guess who it was? If you thought the answer was Rachel Davis, Chat's beloved wife, you'd be correct. That mission was tense for a whole cascade of reasons that I won't get into at the moment. But you catch the drift. Chat completely ghosted her. I mean, who wouldn't? There wasn't a lot of trust left in that relationship. He took a couple weeks off after that mission. We all did, for varying reasons. He went and did a whole investigation himself. I guess he wanted answers. I never really asked about it, but it's funny how life works out. That explains why the Horseman made me spare him. Can you call Rachel? I really don't want to, Chad replied. That's not what you told the zombie lady. You heard that? Chad asked. I'll have Mikhail see if we have any files on him. I'll get on the line with MI6, even though they're probably compromised, just as bad as we are. Chad, you know what you gotta do. Opilia cut in as she turned to a computer and started to type. I could see Chad's face falter a bit. Ugh, fine. Chad walked out of the room. I stood there with a smirk on my face as I watched him leave. I could feel Shaw's eyes burrowing into the side of my head. What did you mean, zombie lady? He asked. The holographic image switched from Terrell to Chad being locked up in a lab at Deathfall. A Revenant banging on the glass from another lab. This Revenant wore a lab coat with the name Janet written on it. Chad had his back to the glass and looked more bored than anything.
I know. I shouldn't worry about her, but she was my wife,
Chad said. The Revenant replied in a low groan. Chad turned and looked up at the zombie, his face annoyed.
No, she was great as a wife. Granted, the whole MI6 thing kinda killed the relationship.
The Revenant again let off another groan.
You're right, Janet. I should call her.
It got quiet as Chad thought for a second. He took a deep breath.
You know, you give horrible advice. I can't call Rachel. Do you know how much trouble I get in? Shaw would eat my ass for breakfast.
The Revenant looked at him for a moment before trying to bite down on the glass.
No, not like that, you pervert.
That was when the footage stopped, leaving Shaw and Opilia standing there with two very different expressions on their faces. Opilia looked concerned, while Shaw looked slightly embarrassed. It was hard to get the audio, but I'm glad I did, I said, trying not to smirk. We need to get him to see a psychiatrist, Shaw said. No, he misses his wife, Opilia said. MI6 got back with Opilia rather quickly, telling Opilia that after Terrell had escaped, he'd gone and reported in at a safe house a few miles south of Mondaville, so we prepped up to get ready and go in. The plan was simple. Go in, get him, and get out. If Gideon's security forces hadn't gotten to him already. We organized a strike team, which consisted of me, Chad, Opilia, Aisha, Keith, Ray, and Miguel. It took everyone a minute to prep. While they did, I watched security footage of the Reagan's brick. There, Carlos Estevez was sitting in a cell with the man that had helped Opilia and her team escape the prison. A man who happened to be his brother, who he left to rot in that godforsaken place. Juan Estevez watched as his brother rocked back and forth in his seat, mumbling about how he needed his supplement. I only exhaled as I shut off the screen. I didn't want to watch that. An analyst in the control room perked up as he turned to Shaw. Sir, we've got an approaching aircraft. Who is it? Asked Shaw. It's Deputy Director Jones. Shit, Shaw said as he turned and abruptly walked out of the room. The name did pique my interest. I had only met the Deputy Director a few times. I didn't know much about him, other than he'd been the head of SNOD and had it shut down when Shaw was about to take over. According to Horseman, it was because Shaw wanted to open an investigation into Gideon. I cloaked and stood at the doorway to the control room, knowing that they'd be back. Sure enough, about 3 minutes later, Jones came marching down the hallway with Shaw on his tail. You're going to turn over custody of Estevez to me, as well as custody of the agents involved in the fiasco in Mexico. Are we clear? Jones demanded. I could tell by Shaw's heart rate that he wasn't enjoying the conversation, but he didn't really have another choice. Fine, but let me go talk to them first. You know the SAD guys. They're gonna want to fight. Don't do anything funny. I'll have your ass arrested too. Understood. I decloaked and walked into the room behind him. Hello, Director. The director had a confused look on his face. Who is this? I'm curious. Gideon buys most of their politicians off with free easy pills. But my HUD's toxicology screening of you doesn't indicate that you have any in your system. How'd they buy you off? Jones's jaw lowered a bit. Excuse me? He asked. I could hear his heart rate escalate. You heard me. Who the hell are you? Just an asset, I said. He's the Horseman's Shakarin. Jones turned and looked at Shaw. What? Both Jones and I asked at the same time. You heard me, Shaw said. Jones seemed to take a second to gather his thought. He looked in disbelief. He looked confused. No, he said he wouldn't. Not after. He did. And he did because of Gideon. Jones considered this for a second before shaking his head. It doesn't matter. I've got orders. Now you do too. I left this conversation and very quickly headed down to the staging area, which was almost locker room-esque. I told them all what had just happened. We knew what our mission was. I also knew that Aisha had cubes that could enable all of us to teleport straight to our target. She tossed the cubes, and a portal crafted from golden energy appeared. The 7 of us walked through as Shaw entered the room. I could see him smile at me as the portal closed. I couldn't imagine what excuse he was going to tell Jones, but I didn't care. We had a job to do. We arrived at the safe house Terrell had supposedly been at. It was a meager brick house, small with a short driveway that had a truck in the front. The moment we made it through the portal, Opilia turned and threw up in the grass. We all kind of looked at her for a moment. Are you okay? I asked. She looked up at me. Yeah, that made me nauseous. I'm good now. The house was on the edge of town, so it was secluded from most of the people in the area. I motioned for Aisha and Keith to approach the front door, while Opilia and I went around the house towards the back. Chad had found a nearby hill to perch up on with his M14, while Ray and Miguel took cover behind the truck. I could hear Keith and Aisha on the comlink.
Do we knock?
Keith asked.
Do I look like I fucking know?
Aisha asked.
You cuss a lot,
replied Keith.
You've barely heard me cuss. Rashad tells me you do.
I rolled my eyes. From what I'd heard, these two hated each other. Now they sounded like Opilia and I when we first met. We're going around back, I said, hoping it had stopped their conversation. I'm in position, Chad's voice said into comms. We were at the side of the house now. I had my rifle raised ahead of me. We were approaching a wooden fence that led to a backyard. It's almost like old times, Opilia whispered. How so? I asked. You, me, a potential gunfight? So romantic. I wanted to chuckle at that, but we needed to be serious now. Focus, Agent Wild, I said.
That was weird. Moving in.
I heard Keith's voice over the comlink. I wondered what he meant by that as we pushed the fence open and made our way into the backyard. We found the back door and approached it cautiously. I looked at Opilia, who nodded as I reached to open it. That was when I heard the call that made my blood run cold.
I've got eyes on Victor,
Keith's voice called out. I rammed the door open with my shoulder and shot inside. Opilia closed behind me. We found them in a hallway. Keith was getting to his feet, yanking the sword from his back. It began to glow an almost blinding white color. His eyes wide as well as they locked onto Victor, who stood there calmly, his back to me. Aisha was on the ground below Keith. She looked like she was in pain. Victor himself made my heart go insane.
Angelic essence detected.
I'm gonna kill you, Keith bellowed as he charged in. "The Twilight Blade? Where'd you get that?" Victor asked as Keith charged him. I pulled my sword and went for Victor's back. Keith and I reached him at roughly the same time. I readied myself to stab the man in his lower back, but he vanished before my sword touched him. I barely managed to stop it from going into Keith, who had likewise barely stopped his Twilight sword from hitting my helmet. "Where'd he go?" I asked. "I don't know," Keith replied. Victor reappeared behind Keith and slammed his head into a wall. I pulled my pistol and opened fire, but the bullet did nothing but bounce off. Victor looked at me with a sinister grin. "Trent Grayson, we finally meet." Keith went limp as he fell to the ground. "You're talented," he said, "but weak." He vanished and reappeared in front of me, grabbing my suit and launching me into the nearest wall. I flew through the drywall and into the next room. I could see the bullets from Ophilia's rifle hitting Victor. He didn't look amused. "Please," he sneered. He was suddenly hit in the back of the head by Aisha's spear. But this didn't even bother him as he turned and snatched her by the throat and lifted her up, reaching into a pouch on her waist and pulling her cubes out. The same cubes she used to open portals to teleport from place to place. "I hope you don't need these," he said before crunching them in his hand. "No!" Aisha screamed loudly. Victor turned and slammed Aisha into the now charging in Ophilia. I got to my feet as Victor started to walk towards the front door, only to get shot by Miguel and Ray from behind the truck. "You're gonna need a lot more than that to kill me," Victor said. Keith had come to and gotten to his feet. He had the sword in his hands and was approaching Victor from behind, the sword burning brightly as he did so. He brought it whistling down at Victor, who casually turned and caught it with an outstretched hand. Keith stood there for a moment as he strained with the sword. Victor just smirked. My HUD zoomed in on his hand that was clutching Keith's blade. It was bleeding. "Interesting," he said. Victor vanished, leaving Keith still standing there. I walked over to where Ophilia was laying and pulled her to her feet. Aisha was on a knee behind her. I helped Ophilia out the front door, where Keith was still standing with a confused look on his face. "What was that?" he asked. "A trap," I replied. It took me an hour before I managed to reach the Horseman. He arrived with a semi-shocked look on his face, a look I don't think I've ever seen on him. "Where have you been?" I asked. "Trent, the girl." "What about the girl?" I asked. He snapped his fingers. We found ourselves on the Reagan, where the smell of blood and smoke infested the air. There were men loading bodies into body bags. A sullen feeling came over me. I didn't need to ask. I knew what happened. The trap was a distraction. Now, we were gonna have to learn what the consequences were. Ophilia and I sat in Shaw's old office, where we watched the ship's security footage. Everything was chaotic. We needed answers, and the control room was a disaster. The next best thing was Shaw's computer. It wasn't like he was going to be using it. A lot happens in it. But let me follow the agent of the chaos, Mr. Morales. The footage starts with him in his bunk area. Shaw and Jones are arguing in the control room. Hector Morales opens his phone and looks at it. He's too far away from the camera to make out the text, but he sighs and looks at his feet. Then, he stands and walks out of the room. Hector Morales first walks into the medical bay, where the Lightbender Grandmaster Nigel is laying in his bed. Hector leans against the doorframe with his hands in his pockets. Nigel smiles at him slightly.
I owe you a thanks, Grandmaster. Without you, none of this would have been possible.
I could see Nigel's face gain a hint of confusion. He couldn't speak real well because his ribs had been caved in. Being a lightbender, he'd healed somewhat already, but he'd been set for transport and was supposed to leave about an hour after this video has been filmed.
Well, you and Keith, it wasn't easy. Masking Keith's powers, making sure he didn't even know he had them, building his trust, raising him. I mean, having a lightbender, a Nephilim under my roof? Blah, it was fucking disgusting. But it served a purpose. It led you to my doorstep. The rest was easy.
Morales was standing over Nigel, who stared at him wide-eyed. I could see him reach for a button to call a nurse, but Morales swiped it away.
Do you think Raiden was at my office to kill me? He was there to make sure you didn't. To make sure that Keith's powers activated. All to pique your interest.
Morales produced an obsidian knife.
So, Grandmaster Nigel, thank you.
Morales said right as he jammed the knife into Nigel's throat. It was around then that something happened that shook the ship, almost like it had been hit by lightning. The power cut out for a moment. The camera feed went black. But when it came back on, Ressurected was entering the room in a panic. He cried out. His Grandmaster was dead. He turned to sprint out of the room.
Help! Help!
He cried. Only he was cut off by Morales. Only Morales looked different now. His neck seemed a bit longer. Then his eyes looked almost reptilian.
What are you?
Asked Ressurected.
You can call me Quetzalcoatl.
He sneered before shoving the blade into Ressurected's throat. He then began making his way down another hallway, his body morphing fast. 1 second, it was Hector Morales. The next, it was a massive, oily black serpent with brightly colored feathers around his neck. He made his way through the ship, devouring several guards along the way. At the brick, Carlos Estevez sat with his back against the wall. He looked unconcerned, even though alarms had begun going off all around the ship. His brother stood outside his cell, looking at a guard who was standing at a doorway that led out of the brick and into a hallway.
What was that?
Asked Juan.
I'm not sure. I've been trying to radio topside, but I'm not getting anything back.
A massive, feathered snake head suddenly dropped into frame and clamped down onto the guard's head. Juan quickly shut the door and stumbled backward. I watched as Hector moved back into a more humanoid form and kicked the door in. Juan went for his pistol, but Hector moved in a blur, knocking him out before turning and looking at Carlos.
I had to change my whole plan for you and the girl.
Carlos Estevez stood up and smiled.
Oh, I feel special.
While Morales worked the prison break, there was another problem in another hallway on the ship. This one, Gideon security forces were gunning down sailors. Security forces that were led by a massive red-armored samurai. This thing had to have been 7, maybe 8 feet tall. He bashed sailors' heads in with his massive club. A club that seemed to charge itself with streaks of red and blue lightning that crackled between the metal grooves. But he wasn't the only person that caught my eye. Another of the mercenaries wore a trench coat and wielded 2 thin daggers. Half his face had been scorched by a recent explosion. It was Jackson, the same vampire that David Stone had given his life in an attempt to slay. But he wasn't even the one that shot a shiver of rage up my spine. That honor belonged to the lead mercenary. The red-headed, now super soldier that had taken my life, Jamie King, stood there with a pistol aimed. The 3 and their mercs had carved a path of blood and bullets through the bowels of the ship as they made their way towards the control room. When they arrived, they found Shaw as he motioned for Grace and the preacher to get inside. Shaw was about to go in himself when he caught a thin dagger in the back of his leg. Shaw fell to the ground, but not before he got his hand on the scanner that caused the control room door to shut, leaving himself outside with the 3 assailants,
Shaw.
Jamie started.
You really shouldn't have done that.
Shaw had maneuvered himself to where he was sitting with his back against the wall. He looked up at Jamie. You're a real piece of shit, Jamie. You know that? Shaw said. Jamie only chuckled as he stood straight up and raised his pistol. He didn't say anything clever. He didn't say anything petty. He just blasted a hole in Shaw's forehead. The rest happened fast. Jackson kicked the steel door in that led to the control room, flying in a blur and throwing more knives into the closest analysts. One of the daggers hit Father Raphael in his eye. Grace screamed loudly before being hit by a bolt of lightning. I wasn't sure if she was dead or not. Jamie stood over her with Jackson and Raiden flanking him. I could see Jones cowering in one of the corners. Raiden, the rat samurai, picked Grace up and tossed her over his shoulder. The group linked up with Morales and Carlos outside the control room. That must have been around the time that Victor had finished with us, because that was when Victor himself appeared amongst the group. He smiled as he looked at Grace, then snapped his fingers. The whole group was suddenly just gone. I couldn't tell exactly how Opilia felt about this whole thing. I could tell that she was shaken. I mean, how couldn't she be? We'd just gotten our ass kicked. But we hadn't lost. Not completely. Not yet. I think she knew this too. I gave her a slight squeeze on her shoulder before standing and walking out. Up top, I found Keith and Aisha. Aisha was kneeling over the body of Nigel. What happened? She asked. The Horseman had given them a briefing on the security footage. He'd seen it before he'd come and picked us up. I'm sure you're wondering where he and the other angels had been during this whole predicament. Well, they were in heaven, discussing which rules they'd be allowed to bend in order to apprehend Victor. Hector happened. He's not human, Keith said in a voice that sounded heartbroken and angry. Aisha turned and shot up into his face. I knew it! I knew you were— He didn't know, Horseman said sternly as he approached him. Morales masked himself with blood magic. I didn't even know his true self. I'm not sure how, but he's working with Victor. He has been this whole time. He used you, Keith. He knew what you were. He probably gave Simon the tip on his own safe. He knew Aisha would come for you, even at Raiden waiting. One clever line of dialogue later, and he's in. His whole mission, your whole life, was to take down the Eastern Lightbender Temple. Why? Asked Keith. The Horseman sighed. Because he's a god. I walked over to where the body bags were, where Shaw's body had been placed. I could hear Opilia walking up behind me. I can remember thinking that Shaw somehow looked even more annoyed in death, that dying was simply an inconvenience to him. It sure had been to me. I also wondered if the Horseman could bring him back. After all, he was one of the best. Don't blame yourself. Jamie did this, I said as Opilia stopped right next to me. I wasn't going to, she replied. Good. I could hear her inhale. This is probably a bad time, but I figure once the world may end soon, are we ever gonna talk? I looked at her. There was an eagerness to her, an eagerness and a hint of exhaustion. I took a deep breath. We will, once this is all over. That was when Jones approached us. He looked upset. I mean, we were all upset, but he seemed angry. They killed him like a fucking dog, he growled. Jamie did this. You knew what Gideon was capable of, I said. I never thought they'd openly attack a US military vessel. They did. What are you going to do about it? I asked. We took the next few hours to gather our bearings. The Horseman and I went over the security footage over and over again. We didn't find much. We did, however, find out that Father Raphael had somehow survived. The knife only took his eye. He'd been sent to a hospital on shore. We stood in the security room with Opilia and Jones, trying hard to figure out our next move. We didn't have shit to go on. until Chad walked in with a massive smile on his face. "She called me back," he announced. We all turned and looked at him. "What did she say?" I asked. "After she finished chewing me out, she told me everything." So, Agent Terrell. Apparently he was working undercover for MI6, but we knew that already. Apparently, factions across the pond had been working the same case against Gideon that we were for several months. Terrell being their best agent, even after we compromised him, he managed to re-infiltrate Gideon's security forces. Now, he was embedded in with them, somehow managing to make contact with Chad's ex-wife. He knew where Victor was. He also knew where Victor had planned to test the weapon. Fucking Grozny. I exhaled. I explained this to, well, everyone. We'd already come up with the makings of a plan. As I stood there with my arms crossed, Aisha, Chad, Opilia, Ray, Keith, and Miguel stood around me. "I'll understand if you don't want to go. What we're facing is more dangerous than any of you could possibly imagine." I took a deep breath. "In the past, I've said that you weren't the good guys. I wasn't trying to change the world. Just live in it. Then I died. The world doesn't need survivors. It never did. It just needs people to do the right thing." Some speech, I know, but I knew it wasn't going to take much convincing. Everyone there had lost something. Everyone there wanted a fight. Wanted revenge. But that wasn't important. Innocent lives were at stake. "I'm in," Aisha said. "Me too," added Chad. "Same, but how are we going to fight Victor? We threw our biggest guns at him, and they didn't do shit." I smirked as the angels appeared in the sky behind me. "We're gonna bring some bigger guns." Our plan was relatively simple. Chad's ex-wife was our in. We'd linked up with her in Grozny, and she would escort us to where Grace was being held. From there, we'd rescue her and destroy all traces of Lazarus in the building. We prepped on the flight deck. We had our whole team plus 3 APCs and a 12-man unit of Navy SEALs that Opilia had worked with several times over the last few weeks. I didn't know their leader very well, just that he ironically went by the codename Angel. He seemed like a good dude. Jones was currently en route to a nearby base to see about getting us air support. While we prepped, I did notice as one of the angels, Rain, approached Keith. I was helping load weapons into an APC. Keith only sighed as he approached him. "Why?" he asked. "You're wondering why I left?" "I get why you left," he replied. "Why didn't you come back when Dad died?" I could see her face falter a bit. I couldn't," she replied. Keith turned to her. "You need to do better than I couldn't." "Keith, I wanted to. When you were born, I was sent on a mission to another reality. By the time I came back, you'd been completely masked from us. I searched for you. I did. But whatever magic Hector used was powerful." Keith considered this for a moment. "Well, maybe we can try to start over once this is all finished," he said softly. I could tell that this meant a great deal to the angel. I couldn't help but think about my parents. My mother had died when I was in my teens, leaving my dad alone to try and raise 3 kids. Things would have gone wrong if not for our grandfather, who retired just to help out. Things were difficult at first, but they got better, until we found our grandfather with his throat slit in our driveway. My father disappeared shortly after. I think he went after whoever did it. But I don't know. It was kind of why I jumped at the opportunity to join the CIA. I figured I could get some answers. But between the missions and meeting Opilia, my side hobby took a backseat. I felt bad for Keith. I at least had memories of my parents to hold on to. He didn't. But maybe he could change that. It took us a bit, but we were eventually ready to go. Chad stood atop the first APC in our column. Aisha and Keith stood in front of it. Aisha was staring at the teleportation cubes in her hand. "Where did you get those?" asked Keith. "Rashad, you sure you want to go through with this?" she asked in response. Keith took a deep solemn breath. "That man used and lied to me my entire life. He has to die," Keith said. Aisha exhaled. "Okay then," she said as she tossed the cubes. They formed the corners of a yellow portal large enough for the APC to fit through. The APCs went through first, Chad standing on top of them. I followed with Opilia, Keith, and Aisha. "I was beginning to think you were standing me up again," a voice asked from the front. "And miss all the action?" Chad replied. It was pouring down sheets of rain when we exited the portal. I was honestly just happy that I had the suit on. It was wet and cold. Opilia turned and vomited as she exited the portal next to me. I could feel everyone staring at her. My HUD scanned her, but the readings all came back fine. "You good?" I asked. "I'm fine. Portal makes me nauseous." I took my helmet off as I approached Rachel. The rain was colder than I'd expected. All I could think about was finishing the greeting and getting it back on. Rachel looked at me and smiled slyly. "I heard you were dead," she said. "I was. It was boring as hell." She smirked. "So, what's the plan?" "We're gonna storm Gideon Lab." "That's bold. They have upped protection tenfold." "We've got people on that," I said. A bolt of lightning lit up the sky. The storm raging across the city was massive. I even spotted a tornado somewhere along the outskirts. I can remember groaning under my breath. The storm would make actual air support impossible. We made our way in the APCs to the target building. Rachel had brought a 12-man SAS team with her as well, so we didn't exactly have any elbow room. I was sitting next to Rachel, who had a tablet out that had a live feed from Taro's point of view. The video feed was coming from the man's glasses. It showed him walking into a room. Grace was tied to a chair with several IV units attached to her arms. They had been drawing her blood. Jackson stood over her.
Your father was a bigger monster than any of us. Not bad for a human.
He sneered.
Sir, Victor needs you.
Taro said.
For what?
Jackson asked as he turned around.
Something about the terms of your deal. You need to go over there.
Jackson groaned before walking out past the mercenary. Grace's eyes met the mercenary. I could see a smile come across her face.
That guy's an ass,
Taro said as he pulled his mask off. Taro then started to unhook Grace.
I owe you one. My God, you've lost a lot of blood. Do me a favor and don't go feral.
Taro said. Feral? I asked as I looked at Rachel.
It's what happens when a vampire doesn't have any blood for an extended period of time. They lose their self-control.
Horseman's voice said into my comlink.
What are you doing?
Asked another voice behind Taro.
Boss wants her moved.
Taro said.
Hang on, I need to radio this in.
The mercenary said behind Taro.
Okay, maybe go a little feral.
Taro said as he stepped to the side. Grace moved in a blur of motion. Her mouth found itself attached to the mercenary's throat. Blood went everywhere as Taro checked to make sure his pistol was loaded.
Better?
He asked.
So much,
Grace replied as she wiped the blood from her mouth.
Good, let's go.
Taro replied. By then, my suit had hijacked their feet. I could see it in the corner of my HUD. It was a good way to keep up with their location. Our angelic friends had arrived and started a shitstorm at the front gate. They were now free to engage humans. That was what their meeting had been about, which meant there were no guards patrolling the 10-foot-high concrete wall around the rest of the facility. I exited the APC and jumped over the wall. It was clear. All the fighting was in the front. I'm going to cut the power. Opilia, take a squad and finish securing the front. Aisha, take a squad and clear the sub-level labs. Ray, you and Miguel go and find Grace. With that, I was back on my own. I made my way through a window. Inside the facility, the alarms were already going off thanks to the angels up front. I needed to make my way up to the roof and to the building's generator to kill the power. The building was only around 7 stories tall, so it wouldn't be a long trip up the stairs. I made my way towards the stairs, my HUD showing me the feeds from several Navy SEALs' GoPros. One feed showed a SEAL following Chad and Rachel as they followed Opilia.
You know we're still technically married, right?
Rachel asked.
I gave you the divorce paperwork. You never showed up to court.
Rachel said.
I got a little busy, okay?
Replied Chad.
Doing what?
She asked.
You're a spy. You probably already know. Okay, fine. I did miss you though.
Rachel said. Chad exhaled.
I missed you too.
The HUD cut to a SEAL that was following Keith and Aisha.
They know we're here.
Keith said as he raised what looked like Rashad's old energy blaster.
Good.
Aisha replied, blowing up a nearby security camera. Can you get into the security system? I asked the Horseman through comms as I found the stairs.
I'm trying, but the system seems to have been warded to some degree.
How the hell does that work? I asked.
Trent, I could spend 2 months trying to explain it.
I rolled my eyes as I started to ascend the stairs. The feed with Keith and Aisha showed them in the lab area, which was completely empty. It was barren almost. No equipment, no people, nothing aside from the glass walls.
Why is it so empty?
Keith asked.
I don't know,
replied Aisha. That was when there was a flash of lightning ahead of them. The SEAL whose POV I was watching adjusted his aim as Raiden exited the flash. Little light bender, he said right before lifting his hand. A bolt of lightning suddenly zapped the SEAL, who fell down dead. His camera now aimed at Keith, who was approached by Morales, who had his hands in his pockets. After all this time, you finally know the truth. We don't need to be enemies. Keith readied himself for a fight, aiming his blaster at Hector. Yes, we do. Keith fired a white beam of energy at Morales. But Morales was faster than expected, dodging the blast and kicking the blaster from his hands. Keith staggered back a step or two before yanking the sword from his back. You were like a father to me, but it was all fake. You used me, Keith barked. Morales had his hands up. Come on, Keith, let's not make this difficult. Keith ignored that and took a shot at Morales. The sword missed by maybe an inch before Morales morphed again into a snake form, opening its giant maw and trying to eat Keith whole. Keith was fast though, slashing the beast's eye with his blade, causing the snake to morph back into Hector, who was holding his now bloody eye. You ungrateful little shit, I should have killed you like I did your father. Keith replied to this by cutting Hector's head from his shoulders, the head bouncing across the floor toward the camera. I couldn't see much else. I kind of figured that Aisha had engaged Raiden. Hey! I heard Keith shout. Then I could see a flash behind the head. That was when I'd made it to the roof of the facility. The rain was still falling hard. I was looking up at a neon blue Gideon sign. I sighed. The generator was right underneath it. My HUD locked onto it, and I hit the EMP button on my wrist, sending an aimed electromagnetic pulse at it. The sign suddenly went out. Power's out, I said.
Raiden to Keith,
Aisha's voice said over the comlink. My HUD feed cut to another SEAL who was standing near Opilia, Raziel, and Rain. Rain looked very distressed, her wings spread out wide. Shit, she bellowed. Rain, don't, Raziel warned. But it was too late. Rain was skyward. My hood feet shifted back to Terrell, who had come to a stop in the hallway. His weapon aimed at a figure standing in front of him. A thin man with 2 thin daggers. "Shit," Terrell said. "Hello, girl," Jackson replied as Grace stepped past Terrell. "I don't have any silver ammunition," Terrell said. It got quiet for a moment. Grace didn't take her eyes off of Jackson. I could tell what she was thinking. She only confirmed it with her next line. "Don't worry about that. I'm gonna rip his fucking head off." Grace charged at Jackson in a blur, decking him in the face hard. Jackson responded by trying to stab Grace, but Grace dodged it and tried to punch him again. But he was ready this time, his knife ending up in her wrist. Grace took a sharp breath. Jackson tried to stab her with his other dagger, this one aimed for the throat. But Grace caught him below the wrist. Terrell raised his pistol. That was when a gunshot rang out. A bullet sailed through the side of Jackson's head, causing it to snap to one side. But his wound healed almost instantaneously. He straightened back up and looked at Grace. "Normal bullets won't kill me," he growled. What Jackson hadn't realized though is that when he had been shot in the side of his head, he'd let go of the dagger that wasn't in Grace's wrist. Grace had caught it, then shoved it into his throat. "No, this will," Grace growled as she used the knife to slowly cut Jackson's head off, before kicking his body to the floor. "Oh God," Terrell yelped. Grace dropped the head onto the floor and raised her foot before bringing it down hard on the severed head, turning it to mush. "Remind me to never piss you off," Terrell said. I made my way to the edge of the roof now, trying to look through the sheets of rain for rain. I eventually found her as she landed across from a figure. My HUD zoomed in on it. Victor, with Keith out at his feet. I couldn't hear what was said. Thunder boomed as lightning crackled through the sky. I could hear movement behind me, but based on their erratic breathing and heart rate, it isn't what I was worried about at the moment.
"We found Victor,"
Raziel's voice said on comms. Aeolaer and Raziel landed next to Rain. There was more dialogue that I couldn't hear. Victor was in full armor. He wielded a glowing white sword and silver-colored shield. Aeolaer charged in first, trying to swipe at Victor with his glowing twin hooks. Victor cut the angel in half in an instant, while blocking a blow from Rain's glaive with his shield. They fought for a few seconds, moving away from Keith as he started to come to. He managed to pick up his sword right as Victor disarmed Rain and took her hostage. There was a standoff. Victor's sword was at Rain's throat. Raziel and Keith standing their ground. More talking. Keith dropped his sword. Victor smiles. Then, his sword suddenly explodes from Rain's chest. Keith screams so loud that I can hear it from my rooftop, almost a mile away. Victor vanishes, leaving Keith holding Rain as she dies.
"Victor's gone. Aeolaer and Rain are down. I've got Keith,"
Raziel said into comms. "So, this is what they turned you into. Seems a bit generic," a voice said from behind me. A voice that made my blood boil. "I was wondering where you were," I said as I turned to Jamie. "Why, you in a hurry to die again?" he asked. "Victor brought you back. He didn't give you a single weapon to kill me with." I could hear his heart rate. My HUD could see his heart. It was beating so hard, it could power a small car. I could also see it in his eyes. The man looked like he was about to cry. "I don't think you're here to kill me," I said. "You don't know why I'm here. You don't know shit about me," he growled. "If you wanted to kill me, you'd have done it 30 seconds ago. You said it yourself. You wanted to make a better world. How does a genocide accomplish that?" I asked. I could see him stammer a bit. He took a breath. "I didn't think it. Did he release the weapon? I asked. Jamie's eyes went straight to the ground. He did. You can't beat him. He's where? I asked. The other building. I was done with the conversation. I stepped forward and decked Jamie in the side of the head, knocking him out cold. Victor's released the weapon. We need to get a move on before the infected hit the streets.
About that.
Raziel's voice called into comms. I stood up and looked out at the other building. Raziel was standing at the edge of the roof, looking down over a set of 4 open garage doors, where they were pouring out. We would eventually call these variants Lazarus crawlers. They started out human, yes, but they'd mutated. The pathogen caused their blood to boil. Their spines elongated and morphed until they had spikes protruding from the center of their backs and through their clothing. Their arms had become elongated to twice their normal length. Bone claws had exploded from the tips of their fingers as well. Their mouths were unhinged like that of a snake's, if the snakes had massive jagged teeth. They ran around on all 4s, screeching loudly as they did so. I gritted my teeth. Things just got even worse. I took a deep breath as I heard Jamie start to move behind me. I turned and knelt over him. He wasn't awake. Not yet. I should kill you, I said. But I think there's potential for some good here, even if you don't know it. The Horseman appeared behind me. A week ago, you'd have cut his head off, he said. I know. What changed? I'm just trying to be what I was meant to be. And what's that? I turned and looked at him with a smirk. It was like I said earlier. The world didn't need any more survivors. It needed people to do the right thing. One of the good guys, I said. A few moments later, Jamie was being escorted into a stairwell by 2 SEALs while I stood there with Opilia. The infected had already attacked most of the buildings surrounding the one they exited. Why didn't Terrell tell us about the second building? I asked. Rachel says he didn't know. It was Gideon top brass only, she replied. I looked back out at the city. We can't let them take the city, I said. She shrugged. Our air transport is useless until we do something about this storm. We need to distract the infected until we can get airborne. And how do we do that? Opilia asked. I looked at the unlit Gideon sign. I could feel her staring at me. I've got one idea. And the storm? That was when Aisha came marching through the doorway. We need to find Raiden, she growled. That would have to wait. We needed to get the attention of the crawlers. The first step was turning on the power and getting the lights back on. Then the SEALs in chat would deploy flares onto the road just ahead of the front wall. The APCs parked just outside the walls, as their miniguns would be detrimental to holding back the horde. I was heading downstairs when the SEALs deployed the flares. I could see the whole thing through Angel's GoPro. The light bathed the surrounding area in a red tint. It also revealed several crawlers who were already making their way towards the wall. All hell broke loose. The infected screeched in unison as they charged. Everyone on the walls opened fire. The APCs opened up with their miniguns. I booked it down the stairwell. We made it out into the courtyard to a symphony of gunfire. The walls surrounding the facility were 10 feet tall and made from concrete. They had wooden platforms lined up right next to them so GSF could use the wall as cover. I jumped onto a platform right between Chad and Rachel, just in time for the gunfire to stop. The street ahead of me was littered in blood and body parts. But I knew that we hadn't won yet. What's going on? I asked. They went into the buildings, replied Chad. We all knew what was happening. The infected were more intelligent than we'd expected, but not by much. They're planning their next move, I said. What should we do? Asked Chad. The same. My HUD pulled up the feed from Terrell's glasses, where Terrell and Grace had found Miguel and Ray standing in the armory. Miguel was looking up at all the guns on the walls in awe.
It's like a Texan Christmas,
he exclaimed. Ray turned and looked at Grace, then froze in surprise.
Wait, I know you.
Grace said.
Grace?
Ray asked.
Yeah, I don't know your name.
Grace replied.
Who is this?
Terrell asked.
I'm Agent Ray Bussey, CIA. Ew.
Terrell said. That was when blinding flashes accompanied several lightning bolts that slammed into several parts of the wall as well as 2 of the APCs. I was sent careening through the air and into the mud behind me. I was quickly on my feet and helping Opilia up to hers, a massive hole in the wall behind us. I looked around the courtyard. There were several down seals. Chad was on his feet. Rachel had her weapon aimed in my direction. My eyes went wide. That was when I realized she was aiming behind me. I turned to see a crawler charging into the hole, one that Rachel shot dead in its tracks. However, 6 more took its place. Get everyone inside the building, I shouted at Opilia. I drew my sword and went to work. I could see Aisha was doing the same with her spear. In the corner of my hut, I could see Angel's feet again. He had landed outside of the wall. One leg had been blown off. He had his pistol raised at one of the crawlers as it charged him. To his credit, he killed it. But several more were suddenly upon him. His screams were loud. I could hear them from my position. The crawlers were far more dangerous than their Revenant counterparts. That was easy to see. Aisha and I held our ground while everyone else got inside. I cut several down as I found myself fighting backwards. Aisha and I were the last 2 in the courtyard now. I knew I had an advantage that she didn't. I had armor. Get inside, I commanded. The door in the courtyard was one you'd expect to see in a bomb shelter, a large metallic sliding door that Aisha barely managed to slide under before it closed. I was out in the courtyard by myself now. I cut down several more crawlers, but there were so many of them. One even tried to bite my shoulder blade, only for its teeth to shatter on my armor. It wasn't much longer before I found myself under a dog pile. Then, just as suddenly, I was teleported into a hallway, the Horseman standing over me with Opilia and Chad beside him. What now? I asked as Chad helped me up. The infected will undoubtedly attempt to gain entry. Luckily for you, this place is on lockdown. I recommend you take Aisha to the other building, link up with Raziel and Keith, and find Raiden. A few moments later, the Horseman had teleported Aisha and I to a nearby rooftop, right in front of Keith and a kneeling Raziel. Well, that was convenient, Keith said. Raiden took out the walls. We need to. A bolt of lightning interrupted me as it hit the roof not 10 feet from our position. We found ourselves staring Raiden in the face. He was a lot bigger than I thought. Huh? Keith said. This is awkward, I said. I could see Raiden's shoulders semi-slump. Shit, he growled. Wrong rooftop? I asked. Yeah, he said as he readied his club. Another bolt of lightning came whistling down toward him, but it dissipated before I could reach him. Trying to teleport away? I asked. Yeah. Not working? No. The Horseman looked over at Raziel. Go and find Victor. The kids will take care of this one. I can remember laughing at that. I still wasn't used to being referred to as a kid. For all this talk about Raiden being a rogue god, I honestly expected him to put up more of a fight. The exchange was quick. We attacked. He tried to whack me with his club. I dodged it and slashed one of his legs with my sword. Aisha went airborne. Keith waited for an opening. Aisha's spear ended up in Raiden's shoulder. Keith found his opening when he stepped Raiden through his knee. I'd found myself behind the red giant. I vaulted myself into the air and brought my foot down hard onto the back of his head. Raiden fell face first onto the rooftop. The rain suddenly stopped, and the moonlight shone through the clouds. I stood with Aisha and Keith. That was surprisingly easy, I said. Shall we kill him? I want to kill him, answered Aisha. Not yet, Keith said. I still need him to find Lucy.
This is Director Jones. Air support is inbound. I repeat, air support is inbound.
A voice sounded off on our comlink. I breathed a massive sigh of relief as I turned to look at the Gideon lab, only to see the building covered in infected. And when I say covered, I mean they scaled the front of the building like ants, scattering up the walls and looking for an opening. As mentioned earlier, the building was in lockdown, which meant the windows had all steel covers over them. It didn't take long for the air support to show up, a pack of small Littlebird helicopters along with some Blackhawks.
We're approaching. We can't extract until you clear the infected off the building.
Ah, shit, I mumbled under my breath.
I may have an idea for that,
Ophelia's voice said onto comms. My mind pondered what her idea was. That question was answered when the doorway to the building slowly started to open. The infected didn't waste any time forcing their way inside, but that may have been a poor choice on their part. The doorway opened the rest of the way, revealing a black Abrams tank with Chad sitting on the machine gun turret. Chad opened fire on the infected, turning several of them to red slush before going back down and closing the tank hatch. The tank was swarmed almost instantly as it slowly inched its way out of the building. The doorway closed behind it. The tank slowly inched its way out of the courtyard. The infected followed it out. Ophelia had basically used the tank as bait to lure the infected away from the building. Ophelia? I asked on the comlink.
Yes?
Where'd you guys get the tank? I asked.
The bait is working. I'll get you guys on the roof,
Jones said. I looked up at the choppers, just as one of the Blackhawks was slammed into by a rocket.
Where'd that come from?
Asked Jones over comms. The Black Hawk suddenly spun out until it collided with the side of the building. I could see Terrell's video feed in the corner of my hut. He, Grace, and Ray were on the stairwell shooting down at several crawlers that had been coming up at them. Shit, I thought to myself. Another rocket came flying in towards the Littlebird, which barely dodged it. The chopper turned, and the gunner opened fire on the culprit. My hut zoomed in on them, revealing Carlos Estevez sprinting across a rooftop with a rocket launcher in his arms. A Blackhawk landed on the rooftop of the Gideon lab. It began picking up our guys, starting with Jamie and a few soldiers. Grace, Terrell, and Ray had weapons aimed at the doorway as something was slamming into it. They loaded up onto the chopper, and it went airborne. My eyes went back down to the tank, which was still being swarmed. It looked like a bunch of ants going after a picnic. The tank started moving as the chopper lowered itself. It was one of the Littlebirds, one with Jones piloting and Juan Estevez on the machine gun. Juan opened up on the infected crowding the tank, peeling them off as the tank started to pick up speed. The rest of the infected started to give chase. It took a second, but most of the infected were chasing the tank down a long stretch of road. No more infected were on the tank, but there had to have been hundreds running behind it, all lined up for the choppers. The chopper launched a slew of missiles and machine gun fire into the horde. Explosions rocked the street behind the chopper.
Raziel has engaged Victor underneath you,
the Horseman said into the comlink. The three of us on the roof took off, going inside the building below us through a small doorway. We found ourselves in a hallway running at full speed. Victor stood with his back to us at a massive hole in the wall that looked to be about the size of Raziel. He watched the choppers as they gunned down the creatures. "No!" he growled as he went skyward out from the hole.
Victor's outside,
Jones called out. We made it through the hole just in time to see the former general of Heaven's armies surrounded by helicopters.
We have you surrounded. Drop your weapons, or we'll open fire,
Jones's voice boomed from a Littlebird speaker. The angel didn't reply, moving in a blur of motion and ramming himself through one of the choppers before chopping another's tail off with his sword. He turned to the little bird that Jones and Juan were in. Both were watching in horror. There was a loud bang, and then something hit Victor hard, leaving a cloud of smoke where Victor had been flying. A cloud that a pissed-off Victor emerged from, his eyes locking on the instigator, the black tank below. He started to speak, but something else hit him from behind. This caused him to go careening down into the mud below. Raziel had grabbed him and caused them both to crash into the ground below. The two didn't waste any time engaging again. I jumped from the hole and landed in the mud below, just in time to see the infected that were left suddenly attacking the tank again. "Tell me you guys are not in that tank," I said into the comlink.
Cry about it.
Ophelia's voice replied. I groaned as I changed course from the angels to the tank. "I'll take the tank then. You two help Raziel." I raced to the tank. There were only 5 or 6 infected on it. I cut them down relatively quickly before getting to the hatch. Chad was looking up at me. "What's up, Trent?" he asked. "Oh, you know, stuff," I replied as I turned my head to check on the status of our allies. Victor had sidestepped one of Keith's blows and kicked him into the mud. Raziel and Aisha were recovering. "Ophelia, hit the gas," I said. Ophelia did as asked, or maybe it was Miguel. I don't know who was driving and who was on the gun. The tank went sailing towards Victor. As we approached, I could hear Victor bellow. "You can't beat me, even with the top half of Lucifer's sword. You're too hurt." He was cut off when the tank suddenly collided with him. The tank hit him hard, but we all knew that wouldn't last long. I helped Ophelia, Chad, and Miguel out from the tank before jumping off myself. I was barely off when the tank flipped over, revealing a very pissed off Victor, his wings spread wide and his face full of wild rage and his eyes on me. "Can't you see that I've already won? The weapon is made. It's distributing as we speak." I straightened up as I readied my sword. Everyone was up and ready to go now. I was flanked on either side by Ophelia, Chad, Miguel, Aisha and Keith. Raziel was on his feet as well. The choppers surrounded us with their weapons aimed at him. Victor was powerful, yes. He could put up a fight, maybe even kill all of us. But we didn't care at that point. This was ending, now. "Shut up and fight," I growled. Victor chuckled madly. "You think I'm afraid? Of you? Of death? Look at you all, so angry, so wrathful. All killing me will do is prove my point about you." "Not afraid of death, are you?" Horseman asked as he suddenly appeared behind Victor. Victor's face went white as paper. For a moment, he looked horrified. Victor didn't get another word out before Horseman ripped his wings from his back. "I'm afraid this little game is over," Horseman said as he tossed his wings into the mud. Victor dropped to his knees. "You can't kill me. It's against the rules," he stammered out. The Horseman smirked. "Victor, Victor, Victor, I only disabled you. The honor of killing you doesn't belong to me." Keith stepped forward, his blade burning white hot. "The top half of Lucifer's blade, huh? It's fitting that I send you to hell with it." Anger seemed to flash across Victor's face as he started to yell. "Hell doesn't scare me. You don't." Keith shoved the sword straight into Victor's throat. "Stop talking," Keith roared. I had a good chuckle at that. They always want to talk, don't they? I said to myself as Victor's body plopped to the ground. It didn't hit me until a few hours later, just the magnitude of everything that just happened. Dead or not, Victor had completed the weapon. He'd already distributed it, which meant the world had just changed in a major way. He may have just set off a timer that would count down to doomsday. Only we could stop it. Hopefully. During the cleanup of what we would one day refer to as the Battle of Grozny, A lot actually happened. For one, Jamie and Raiden were both transported to a secret black site prison where they'd be spending the foreseeable future. For two, Jones approached me with an offer. He wanted to reopen Shaw's old unit, but under a different name. He wanted me to be its head. I told him that I'd think about it, of course, saying that there'd be some terms, like I'd pick my own team, that and the CIA would have no say in it whatsoever. He surprisingly agreed to it, but did inform me that he already offered the Lightbenders a place. Aisha declined, but Keith did not. I had a lot to think about. I'd have recruited them anyways. I also wanted to recruit Grace. Her father was part of Shaw's old team, plus he had trained her. I also knew that I'd need Chad and Ophilia's team. But there was something about that thought that made me hesitate, which was something the Horseman picked up on as we stood outside one of the Red Cross outreach tents. "She acquitted herself admirably," he said. "She did, but I know what we're up against. And you worry for her safety because you love her?" he asked. "I do," I replied. The Horseman sighed, almost longingly. "I was in love once. It can be the hardest thing in the world. Tragedy is often unavoidable." "Who was she?" I asked. "She was another horseman like myself. She put herself in danger and was killed. I told her not to come with me, but she was impossible to say no to." "I'm sorry," I said. "If I could go back and save her, I would. But I know that no matter what I do, she'd always insist on coming with me. What happened with her was unavoidable, and I miss her every day. But nevertheless," he trailed off. "What are you trying to say?" I asked. "Opilia is strong-willed. She won't take no for an answer. If you spend your time pushing her away to protect her, you won't get that time back." I thought about this for a minute. The Horseman had a point. A good one at that. Opilia was stubborn. If I tried to keep her away, she'd find another way in regardless. Then I'd have wasted the time I spent pushing her out. I turned and walked into the supply tent, only to come to a grinding halt as I stared one of our loose ends in the face. Carlos Estevez had one arm wrapped around Ophilia's throat, while the other had a knife that was soaked in her blood. She'd come in for water, and had gotten stabbed for it. I was in shock. I stood there dumbfounded for a second. She was alive, but weak. "Oh, Opilia?" I asked. "Mr. Grayson, I'm so glad you could make it," Carlos said with a psychotic grin that stretched ear to ear. I gathered my senses and pulled my pistol, trying desperately to get a shot on him. He seemed to shrink behind her. "Opilia, are you okay?" I asked. "She's not okay, Mr. Grayson. She's been stabbed. I can't tell you how long I've been waiting for this moment. All of us together again." "Trent?" Opilia stammered. That was when the Horseman appeared in the corner of the room. Carlos hadn't been expecting this. "Oh, hello," Horseman said. "Huh?" Carlos asked. That was when Ophilia's eyes met mine. I knew exactly what she was about to do. She used whatever strength she had left to push the knife away from her neck and move her head to one side. It wasn't much, maybe a few inches, but that was child's play. I fired my 1911 once, and Carlos Estevez's brain splattered across the back of the tent. Opilia fell forward, and I caught her. The next few hours were a blur. Medics came and got her. She was transported to a hospital in a nearby city and stabilized. She was lucky. Carlos had missed most of her vital organs. Once stabilized, she was transported to a facility in the States. She would live, of course. During the 36 hours of dealing with her stab wound and transportation, Chad and I made it official with Jones. We were to set start to this new unit. Grace and Keith had accepted our invitations, and the Reagan was to be our home for the foreseeable future. This would all be off the books, of course. It's hard to properly describe the logistics of how that all works. The next time I spoke with Opilia again, she was sitting in a hospital bed watching the news. It was that random onion channel again, the same one that Horseman had played. I honestly wasn't a big fan of their stuff, especially after they interviewed a drunk redneck that went by Ron Skittle about a gator man that tried sleeping with his wife. Their headline today read, "Superstorm in Grozny, Gideon CEO dead." The story went like this. A massive superstorm hit the city of Grozny out of nowhere. The brave and virtuous Victor Marks happened to be in town overseeing repairs to one of the facilities damaged by the riots we'd caused a few weeks prior. He led hundreds of people to take shelter from the storm in one of the facilities. Unfortunately, the facility collapsed, killing him. I couldn't believe the shit I was watching. These guys were actually going to make this guy out to be a goddamn hero. It made my blood boil. But there wasn't much I could do at that moment. They also had a Gideon rap on. Their newest CEO. A man with black, slick-back hair and a thin mustache. A man whose mere presence gave me a weird sense of anxiety. They called him Adrian Stein. I knew just by looking at him that one day we were going to cross paths. But that would have to wait. "I take it you've seen the news?" Opilia said from her hospital bed. "Unfortunately, shit's been on all day. How are you feeling?" I replied. She smiled softly at me. "The pain mats in here suck. Other than that,